Okay, good on.
All right, guys, welcome to the regular scheduled board meeting of Pocahontas School District. I'm going to open it up for Dr. Arbuckle.
Okay, so this evening we've got a couple of informational items that we're going to tackle. Jump right in with the 2.1 future planning. So we invited Michael McBride from Stevens and Todd and Katie with our architectural firm, and I thought they could discuss and answer some of the questions, discuss with us some of the things that you guys have had questions on regarding, new building or millage, or what can we stomach, if you will, on new payments and taxes, things like that. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael and kind of let him jump in. I think he's got a presentation. You have that presentation in your packet. And so I think he's going to kind of work through some of that as well. So
I'll hand this out as well in case you want to scratch on and take notes. That's your copy to do that. Good to see everyone. And just a reminder, my name is Michael McBride. I'm with Stevens Inc. And my role is I serve as the district's municipal advisor. That primary role, there's a lot of things that associate with that, but the primary role is the monitoring and the advice pertaining to the district's debt, the district's bond issues, their outstanding debt, things of that nature. So a lot of what we do is we look at modeling, we look at issuance of debt, how you can finance your project. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about, but obviously if there's anything that draws your attention in this presentation, please stop me, we'll expand upon it. What you're looking at, and I see pretty much everybody is on page 1 of the financial analysis, which is right here, is this financial analysis we put together. This is something we've crafted for years for school boards that I think really helps walk you through all the steps that can hopefully give you some additional information to make good decisions when it comes to looking at what your options are to finance capital projects. So the first thing we have to start with and look at is on page 1, which is your assessment history. So the way the school is funded, in a major part, well, the biggest is the state, and the second biggest component of that is your local funding. The way local funding works is through your local tax assessment and tax rate, or your millage. What you're looking at here on page 1 is a 5-year assessment history.
you're okay.
5-year assessment history of the district. So Pocahontas School District's boundaries, all the real estate, personal, think vehicles, think commercial equipment, boats, things like that, personal property, and then utility properties. Nothing you or I own, but what utility companies would own, say a cell tower or an Entergy substation, things like that that would be in the boundaries of the district. So we're looking at the assessed value of that. That's a key term here because the assessed value is 20% of the appraised value. Appraised value is roughly what you could sell something for. So we have what you could sell something for, which is determined by the county. We take 20% of that, that is the assessed value. In the state of Arkansas, that's what you're taxed on. So that's why we're looking at the assessed value of the district. The one caveat to this is farmland is not done at a fair market, so what you can sell it for, it's actually done at a usage. So whatever is growing on the land or the land is being used for. So if it's livestock, cotton, or timber, those would all have different values. It's not what you can sell that acre of land for. So just a key component to this. So this is the assessed value. As you can see, you're looking at the 2024 assessed value. Keep in mind, property taxes lag a calendar year. This number has actually not been quite certified. It's been certified by your county, but not by the state. So it is extremely preliminary, and you'll see I still have 2023 in a lot of my numbers. 24 assessment will actually pay for your 25-26 fiscal year. So this number will be finalized here in a couple weeks, but just know if there are some changes to it, that is the reason why. I went ahead and called the department. They had received it, they just haven't verified it. So at that point, I'm comfortable to use some loose assumptions with it. But as you can see, we've had some nice growth in your assessment from 2020 to 2024. So your tax base continues to increase. Questions on any of that?
So the assessed value is 20%, so you're showing 236 million. So really, we've got a value of like 1.2 billion in this county, really? I would have thought it would have been 236 million.
And again, that's all within the boundaries of the school district.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
all the property, all the homes, all the cars,
Yeah.
all the, major commercial equipment and factories. I mean, you start tallying all that up, it does add up. And that number is derived by the county assessor. So that is our tax base. So if you flip to page 2, you will see your tax rate. So we have our base, and then we have our rate. So millage rate, property tax, mill, interchangeable terms. We're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about the tax that is levied by the school district on the patrons within the boundaries of the school district. You're looking at 2 different types of mills that have been levied by the district. You have 25 M&O mills, or maintenance and operation mills. Those are required by the state. You're required to have at least 25 of those, and they are for the maintenance and operation of the district. You have debt service mills that are 7.81. That is for the repayment of your debt. The way debt service mills work, though, is there's a little bit more flexibility there. They can be utilized for M&O after your debt has been paid. They can also be used to levy towards additional debt. Your total millage rate right now is 32.81. State average is 39.194. So you're below state average when it comes to your property tax. What one mill brings in, so that little middle page there, middle section of page 2, is kind of tying these 2 concepts together. It shows you if you got a $100,000 home, you would be assessed at 20% of that, so $20,000 would be your tax rate. 1 mil on that, or 0.001, would be $20 per year on that home. So we're bringing those concepts together there for you. Conversely, or on the flip side of that, for the district, we would look at the entirety of the assessment to determine what 1 mil brings into the district. So 1 mil on $236 million assessment brings in about $224,000 annually, assuming a 95% tax collection rate. Does that make sense? Page 3 and 4 are just looking at similar districts by enrollment, sorted by millage rate, similar assessments of similar tax bases, sorted by millage rate. As I told you, you're lower than state average, so obviously you're going to be on the lower end of these. And then that final chart on the page 3, I took Randolph County, every county that touches Randolph County, and all the districts within that group of counties, just to give you kind of a regional snapshot. I have a database of all the districts in the state, so please, if there's, you want to see your football conference, or you want to see your co-op, or anything like that, I'm happy to pull that information for you. Just to give you an idea, because I know page 3 is oftentimes what's the most question of any school board member is, what are our neighbors' tax rates, what are we paying comparatively there? Questions on any of that? So that's really the local funding component for districts. Now I want to really focus in on what is a very key component to your state funding. So it's something that's not necessarily pertinent exactly to a bond issue, because we're not pledging state funds for a bond issue, but it is for the financial strength of the district overall when you're looking at taking on additional debt. It's something you need to be thinking about. Well, enrollment is a very key component to that. The way the state is funding you is the number of students you have. They take into account the assessment, your 25 mills, miscellaneous funds, but really the crux of it is students go up, you get more money, student goes down, you get less money. And so what I have here for you is a snapshot of the last 5 years of your 3/4 average daily membership. That is the number the state uses for determining how much they're going to fund you. So the prior year's average of the first 3/4 average daily membership. Does that make sense? So they average out quarters 1, 2, and 3 and say the number of students you had, that's what we're going to pay you for the next fiscal year. So that's why it's a really key number, and that's why I'm presenting it here to you. So as you can see, you are on a downward trend, but I went back because I was interested in this, and I went and did like a 10-year look back and looked at where you were 10 years ago, and you were roughly in the same range we saw the last 3 years, which I thought was pretty interesting to say that maybe there was just some, you know, boom of students that we rode a wave up and came back down, because if we pull back up, maybe it's not necessarily we're having this big excess of students. I would obviously defer to you for more of that local commentary, but I did think that was interesting when I pulled back. We were more of a 1900, you know, 1800 school district a decade ago. So although that number, you know, if you look back prior to this, it gets a little bit higher than that 2000. Just thought that was of interest. Below that is enrollment by grade. So I pulled this from the state website. This enrollment by grade changes daily, so if you get a different reported number, please apologize for that error. It's just, I gotta get it as quickly as I can from the state, publish this obviously, so there could be some change within that. But it does show me that for this fiscal year, we do look like we could be continuing to get up back to around that 1900 mark, which again, historically looks really kind of like your average over the last 10 years. Any questions on that? So it's always really important to track, because that's a big component of your funding. Page 5 is just audited financials. I just provide a snapshot there for you that shows you your last 3 years. What I'm always looking for here is to make sure that we're not spending more than's coming in. Pretty obvious. And then I like to look down and see if there are any transfers out. You know, obviously the state requires that you don't hold larger balances than 20% roughly of your revenues that are coming in. So you're going to see these transfers, and to me that's indicative of a district moving over money into a building fund, meaning there's excess money that is available there for, you know, construction projects, or if you need additional, you know, bond payments. So this number looks very good to me when I'm looking at what I'm seeing, the money's coming in and the money's going out. Questions so far? Again, please stop me if you have anything. If not, page 6 is your debt profile. So the district has 2 outstanding bond issues. The way we identify these bond issues is by the year in which they close. So when we're talking about bonds, I don't want to get too lost in the nuance of this. It's really similar to your home loan. It's a long-term fixed rate loan, okay? Think of it like your mortgage. Now there's a lot more complexities to it than that, but if you start looking at it from those terms, it's a lot easier to understand. So basically the district has 2 loans, 2 bond issues, your 2015 bond issue and your 2018. If you can see on that first line of each one of those kind of little paragraphs there, that's how I'm identifying it. So when I say they close, think about, again, the home loan example there. So if you remember, you know, you find a house, you accept an offer, 30 days later you actually close and monies are wired. Same concept here. So that's when these monies were wired, 2015, 2018, right? You have about $8.32 million in principal outstanding. But what is very much of interest to me when I'm looking at this profile from the lens of we potentially might need to generate funds for construction projects is you'll notice your 2015 bond issue pays off in 2027. Okay, so keep that in mind for just a second. As you can see though, interest rates associated with these when they're callable, as you can see both these bonds are what we refer to as callable. When you issue bonds, you tell investors for a set period of time you won't do anything but pay on the debt. Well, once they become callable, a district has the option to pay the debt off, has the option to refinance the debt, which is selling a new bond issue at a lower interest rate than what you currently have to get interest savings, or you can restructure the debt, which is more for the stated goal of generating construction funds for the district. Think of a restructuring much more akin to the home loan. You've paid on your loan for 20 years and you say, well, you know, we want to add a garage or we want to redo the kitchen. You can go back down to the bank and say, hey, take my 10-year loan and move it back out to a 20-year loan, and that'll generate me construction funds, and I can go do my home project and keep my payment the same, or increase my payment slightly, or decrease my payment. That's a restructuring. And so when I see a bond issue that has a redemption date or a maturity date that is very soon, it's kind of rings a bell in my mind that there might be an opportunity there. To make sure there is, you have to look on what I have for you on page 7, which is your total repayment of debt. And I apologize for the font size here, but what this is showing you is the principal and interest. So I know there's 4 columns, and I just told you 2 bond issues. It's because I've broken it out for you in principal and interest. So the principal and interest of both these bonds. So if you look at the total, this is what jumps out at me. So for the next 2 years, you have a payment of around 7. I'm sorry, right there. One more this way. Page 7.
17.
Oh, no, that's 7. Sorry, it's got that little line there. Just one more
Okay,
over.
okay. That's what threw me. I was going
Sorry
back.
about that. The total. So as you can see here, it's $775,000 for the next 2 years, and then it drops. So a lot of times, districts will wrap debt to make sure that your payment is minimized. These bonds have not been. So what does that tell me? It tells me there's a restructuring opportunity there, where we could issue new debt that would pay off the 15s, restructure your payment, and levelize it out $775,000. So that to me is a really good sign that if we're looking at trying to generate construction funds, not increase taxes, or minimize the increase of taxes, there's an opportunity there. So just kind of give you an idea of what I see when I'm looking at your profile. I'll give you more definitive numbers on that in here in a second. Questions on that? Page 8. This chart is extremely important, so I want to make sure that we all understand it when we're looking at it, because this is going to give you a really good understanding of your options when it comes to your debt. So this is what we call a coverage chart, or a surplus debt service revenues chart. So what you're looking at here is a chart that shows you the revenues that are being generated from your debt service mills. So if you take your 7.81 debt service mills, multiply it into your 2024 assessment, assume a 95% collection rate, you will get your revenues column. So said another way, your 7.81 mills brings in $1,754,188, assuming you get 95% collections from the county. That's pretty consistent and pretty conservative. Your payment, as I have shown you, is about $775,000 this upcoming fiscal year, and then $490,000 every year after 27, which means you have a surplus currently of about $990,000, which will then jump up to that 1.275. This assumes you have 0% growth in your assessment. So there is this surplus here. Now this coverage number, this is a number that investors use a lot, and I like it, but I don't want to get too stuck on it. I like it because it gives you a way to conceptualize how leveraged you are for your debt. In other words, what this number is saying is let's divide your revenues into your payment. So a coverage of 2.26 times means you have $226 coming in, or 2.6 times your payment going out. So a coverage of 2.26 times is extremely healthy, especially in the municipal bond world, where say a water and sewer transaction could get done at say a 1.15 times coverage, or even a 1.2, we've seen 110. So the point of it is, I don't want to say that that's where you need to go, but it is to say, look, you do have some substantial coverage, and you do have some additional surplus. So that surplus, as I said earlier, this is your surplus debt service revenues. That surplus can be used for any lawful school purpose, right? It can be used to go into your building fund. It can be used for salaries. It can be used for additional debt payments, okay? So what you have to look at here in this column, or what that surplus column is, to me, that is your borrowing power. That is not necessarily your repayment power. You following me on that? So you can lawfully borrow up to that amount as a payment. Not that amount as a, I'm not saying you can only borrow $980. I'm saying you could use a payment. That is not what I'm telling you to do by any means. That's what I'm saying you're lawfully allowed to do. Your repayment power is what we have to figure out. Because a lot of districts are not just putting this in the building fund. Some of them are, and looking at your numbers, you're getting pretty close to it anyway. But the point of it is, these monies sometimes, especially if you're losing students, then leak over to salaries, and they're really being leaned on in your maintenance and operation amount. So you don't want to go run out there and say, oh, well, look, we've got all this surplus, let's just issue as much debt as we can, but then you get in financial constraints on other issues. So that's why I say this chart is so important. It shows you your borrowing power and then helps us think about, okay, let's get to our repayment power to figure out a financing plan for the district. So is everybody clear on that? So that, again, you'll see that chart a lot. I really rely on it because I really think it shows you the nuts and the bolts of, here's your payment, here's your money, here's how much is above that. Now let's look at other factors. Let's see how much we're carrying over to the building fund. Let's see, how we're feeling on, enrollment. That lets us get to the decisions of what we can be comfortable with and actually making a decision on which way to go.
Can I give you a scenario?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's suppose, obviously we're going to do some construction at some point. Let's suppose we want to do our option 2 or the recallable bond first that matures in 27, and we want $4 million.
Yes, sir.
That increases our payment by $310,000.
Correct. So what I would suggest is we actually just jump all the way to 11.
Okay.
And then work backwards from there.
And Michael, I just want to, one more time, I just want to make sure that revenues column on page 8, if I heard you right, it assumes that the assessed value doesn't change for the next 20 years.
Correct. But here's the thing. I don't ever want to increase it because, man, it looks good.
Right,
And
right.
then you feel really comfortable with borrowing. And that's not the point of this. Because, look, I don't know where this economy is going to be in 2 days, let alone a year or 2 years or 5 years, right? I assume it will be fine. I assume assessed values will go up. But they could go down. If we slip into a recession or, even much more to a depressionary phase, you could see stagnation of your assessed values, or you could see a decline in those. So I don't want to be overly aggressive. That's why I'm not assuming any growth.
Can I ask you a question before we move on from bonds?
Absolutely.
It's probably comparing apples to oranges, but what's the average amount of bonds that a school usually has? 2 seems kind of low, but there's been schools in our area that have voted on bond issues to build new buildings,
So that's a great question, and I missed it because I was moving too quickly. Page 6 shows you your debt to assessment ratio. So number of bonds maybe isn't the question, but I get where you're going. It's more like principal amount outstanding,
Yeah.
debt outstanding. So state average is around 9.5–10%, taking the principal amount of the debt and dividing it into the assessed value. So it's like debt to the tax base. I'm not wild about that number. The state tracks it because it doesn't tell me the revenue's coming off of that. So I'm less concerned about it. But to tell you, state average around 9.5–10%, you're at 3.5. So you have a low amount of debt to your tax base.
Okay.
So but again, it doesn't tell me anything on the financial health of the district, because you can have 30%. I've got districts that literally are at 30% in this number. But it's because they're in different situations. They've got higher millage rates, so their coverage is still healthy.
Right.
Or it could be that they're a district that has a lot of school choice in, so not a lot of homes being built in the district, but a lot of people want to move to the district. So they've got really high student count. So their M&O monies, they're kind of doing the reverse. They're leaning on their M&O monies, not their excess debt service revenue money.
I just, with our millage being so low, I look at these other schools, and some of these are building big, fancy new gymnasiums and all these things, but they're doing it by bonds, so I'm not sure.
Yes. So,
But their bond, that's part of their millage. Anything,
Right, but
anything over 25, you can do anything you want to do.
But they're not asking for millage increases, they're asking for bond approvals, like recently, like Paragould,
Yeah.
they got did bond.
yeah, so I did all the work on that
Right.
transaction. Yeah, so it's what we're looking at on page 11.
Okay.
It would be that bond restructuring that you'll see that is,
But would it be true, and I know one school district just put a lot of money in their district, but their village is 48, almost 49.
right.
But, they restructured their bond, but they've been living off of that for 20 years, I mean, they've had a village that high for that long. So that's where all their excess money comes from, the village. And they've been putting it in the village.
Yeah.
But so 11 looks at what you're talking about with that restructuring, which would be going to voters and asking for an extension of the current millage rate. Not an increase, just an extension. Now, it could be coupled with an extension or an increase, but if you just said, look, we want to utilize the 2015 bonds paying off, let's restructure this debt. What you could do is go to voters, you would have a bond issue of approximately, and I've simplified these numbers just for our sake of conversation. When we get more detailed into the financing, I'll get you much, but these numbers are accurate, they're just oversimplified. Because you'd have more than 575, I just wanted to match it up. There'd be, it would depend on what the interest, anyway, go to voters and say, let us just extend this tax, we'll pay off the 15s, and that would generate us $4.66 million in construction funds and not change our payment from what it currently is. So instead of having that drop off here in 2 years, you would now have it levelized out to $775,000 for 30 years.
But that's the max amount we could get at that 4.37 millage rate on that bond?
Well, that is the max amount you could get, assuming a 5% interest rate, and assuming you do not want to increase your annual payment. So the chart I showed you earlier with the surplus, that can be coupled. Look, you can say 1, 2, 3 new mills. With that, you could generate 7.95. Instead of a new mill, you could say, look, we've evaluated our budget, we've looked at what we're putting in the building fund, and for our purposes, one new mill is really $235, roughly what I showed you in the beginning, $225,000 in annual revenue. That's all it really is. I'm saying one mill, that amount of money would support that amount of debt. So if the district says, well, from our current budget standpoint, we can afford $225,000, well, then it's actually no new mills, and you can get 7.95 with the restructuring. You following me on that? So I don't think that this chart down here has to be new mills. It could be revenues provided by the district.
But it'd be either or, adding a new mill or just absorbing it with the.
Correct. Absorbing it into your current budget. And it would be no new revenues coming in, and it would be an increase. So instead of being at 775, you'd be $225,000 higher than that all the way down.
Yeah.
So for the next 30 years. Now, my assumptions are at 5%. If you sold bonds today, you would be much better than that. We've had some significant movement in the last 4 days, but you'd probably be at about 4.5%. That being said, if you're at 4.5%, this number would go up. This middle number is what we got to do to pay off the 15s to minimize the disruption in your payment. That number wouldn't change, that number would go up, and that number would go up. Now, it wouldn't be substantial, but it would be, a couple $100,000. I'm trying to get you conservatively there so that when we get through this on the back end, we're in a much better situation, right? It's always better if the payment comes in less or you can get more construction funds. and we're so far from today to when you could sell bonds that I have to be that conservative. Now, as we get closer and closer, I'll continue to update these models and make sure you have good current information. But think about the process. So, you know, if you're looking at going to voters, you know, no tax extension, you just want to push this out in November of this year, well, we have to have that information to the county. You're roughly calling the election. I mean, we have to get it to them 72 days prior. But if you just kind of look at all the publication and everything, roughly 3 months before November is when you're calling this election. Well, we need to have everything kind of finalized so I can circulate the documents to you to call the election at least a week, maybe 10 days before that. So, I mean, you've got that amount of time, so let's just call it 3 months until you actually even have the election. And then elections are going to be pretty late this year, November 18th. So we could try to get it done before the end of the year. It would depend on your availability to have maybe a special meeting, but it may be challenging. So I say that to say it may not be until January of 26 until you're selling these bonds and locking in that interest rate. So it's a huge gap of time. So I'm trying to be conservative on my assumptions. And I think that kind of shows you why. It's because as we've seen, I mean, literally in the last 3 business days, I've seen rates go down 20 basis points or 0.2%, which is a substantial swing, and then back up 10 today. So we've gone like this, and so that's a 30 basis point variance within one, you know, not even 5 business days. I'm trying to be conservative, and I'll continue to monitor this, but you would be better than these numbers if you were able to sell today. So what I think the big headline here is, you've got a great opportunity for a basis on your structure. You know, from general idea, you know, just big picture, I've heard you know, you're needing somewhere between 4 to maybe 10 million, somewhere in there. I mean, this is a very good start in my mind to say, okay, all right, we have this in our back pocket. You know, we got at least, you know, $4.5, $5 million from not changing anything. Now, it does require a vote of the people, so there is that contingency, but you know, typically if it's not a millage increase or a very minimal millage increase, you're going to see a really high success rate in that. So then the next step is, you know, we got to figure out what we need. So you can solve it either way. What do we need? Okay, Michael, how many mills or how much revenue from the district would that cost us with this restructuring? Or what's the maximum amount we feel comfortable with either asking for in a millage increase or putting towards, or a combination of 2 of our own money? And that can kick you out a number. In other words, if you say, well, look, Michael, we don't want to have a millage increase, we only feel comfortable with about $225,000 from our current budget, then I say, look, you know, $8 million is roughly what you got to work with above your building fund and state.
I guess my question is, does the millage increase only strictly apply to construction?
It does not have to. So it can be used for any lawful school purpose. So you could levy an additional M&O mill, and it would be for the maintenance and operation of the district. If you're levying debt service mills, it has to go to the repayment of debt first, and then it can act as an M&O mill.
Well, I was looking at viewing more like from staff salary, faculty salary increases.
Can we
What is
specify
that?
that when we sell the mill increase?
You can. I find that, and you can do it however you want. So I'm just saying big picture. I typically find it's cleaner if you just put it all in one package, because then you're starting a conversation off saying, well, there's 2 different types of mills in the state of Arkansas. There's M&O, and we're asking you to levy those, and they all have to be on one ballot and one ballot question.
So I feel like my question would be then this, maybe I think this makes sense to me at least. So if we're operating at a surplus of $900,000 and we need X amount or whatever for the school, it would make more sense if we went for a mill increase to do it for the construction, because it increases that extra amount, and we would subtract that to increase the salaries. When we stated that whatever number you want to say,
Right.
or shop for, but you would do the mill increase based on the construction, knowing that you're really using your surplus money to do the salary
Well,
increase.
your debt service, see, that's gonna be out 30 years. You're right, what you're saying is right.
Yes, no, absolutely. So, I mean, it just depends on what, it's all just a big word problem. Like, what are you trying to solve is really more the question. In other words, if you say, look, Michael, we need $8 million and we'd like an additional, let's just say $225,000 annually for salaries. Well, to me, that means you probably need a $2 million increase with a restructuring.
Right.
Because you need $8 million, which is what I show you, $1 million will generate. You're not going to take that from your current surplus, because if you take it from your current surplus, well, then you're not going to have any money for your salaries.
And I don't want to speak for the rest of the board, but that is exactly the question I want to ask, because I think it looks bad on our part to continue to ask the community to support us and give us money for a new school. We're doing nothing for the staff. I just think that's a big issue right now.
No, absolutely. And so if we need more money to maintain and operate the district, we need more money for salaries, then yeah, you're going to be looking at a millage increase. Now, if it's, say, hey, look, we only need, $4.6 million and $500,000 a year, well, then you can do the restructuring and do 2 mills on top of that as well.
Are you saying we would have to break them out so far as on the voting, or they could all be in one?
No, it has to be all in one. So if you remember from the city sales tax, I did the work on that, I guess that was last year, it hasn't even been 2 years ago. The sales taxes in the state have to be itemized in the sense where even though it's one tax, we're going to do water, we're going to do drainage, or we're going to do parks, those are all separate questions. For some reason in the state of Arkansas, millages are all up and down one vote. Even if you said, look, we're going to do 3 M&O mills and 2 debt service mills, it'd be a simple 1 yes or no.
Okay.
That's why I say typically it makes the most sense to just do it all as one package.
That this is what you're going to do with the state.
Yes, I mean, you would have to, you
You're held
can't,
to that.
you can't just levy debt service mills to levy debt service mills. But if you have a project, it's a lot cleaner to just say, look, we need 4
Well,
debt
I guess that's what I'm asking too, like how are we going to read on the bill? Because I don't want it to read on the bill that we're asking for increase just for construction. I want the staff and faculty and the people in the community to know that this money is also to increase, so we have the funds available to increase salaries for our staff.
And if that's the case, then you may want, then it may be, the exception to say, look, let's have a clear 2 M&O mill increase or 1 mill increase and a 1 mill debt service or whatever, and that would make it clear. So now,
But on the ballot, and that's what you're talking about.
Correct, yes.
It just say a millage increase.
But I think that's how you advertise it or like promote it to the community where you could say it like that.
it's a little of both. So Friday Eldridge and Clark, they're the legal side of this. They're who y'all have used. They're who most of the districts in the state use for this type of language. They would have some give and take with you on what the ballot language is. Obviously, they want it to be lawful and legal, but we could look at how you want that worded when it pertains to the M&O will be used. You could have some salaries in there or whatever. And I do know that you will be tied to that.
Right.
And the district will be tied to that forever.
Correct.
So they'll have some things they won't budge on, but we can get you the ballot language when you figure out kind of what you want to do. That's why I always say, a week is pretty tight, but if we had 2 weeks, you say, look, this is our final plan. You give it to me, I can get everything turned around, and you'd have a week before your meeting to look at it and say, can we tweak this? Or even if you're comfortable a month before, I can come up, we can talk about it, we can say, can we tweak this? And we can talk to Friday Firm about that. So yeah, I mean, if you want it to clearly state, this amount of mills will just be used for salary, then yeah, you have some M&O language on there, and then you can have some language on there pertaining to.
Now, are those set up the same way as the other, where they're on the 30-year plan or whatever?
No, M&O mills are permanent. M&O mills are permanent. And so a lot of times that's why kind of lumping them together and having sunset, though, as I think we all know, these debt service mills very rarely sunset. So it's kind of 6 in 1. I think it's just more because when you get into an election, it's getting your information out, amplifying your voice, and being clear and concise. That's sometimes when you have these two different types of taxes, you're trying to explain the nuance that it can get lost.
Yeah.
Now, Michael, when you say it's permanent, you can go back to, a district can go back to the voters and ask to reduce
Yes,
that,
yes,
correct?
you're correct. It is permanent unless changed by the district. So the reason I say that is debt service mills, if you don't have any debt, they fall off the books. So if you did nothing and all your debt paid off in 2049, then those mills would go away.
And we're back to 25.
Back to 25.
You just don't ever see it because people are utilizing it. And two, the way school districts works is, as we know, and you don't want to think about it like this, but it's like your personal debt. At some point, I'm not going to need my home, right? I'm going to go beyond this world, and school's not, right? School's going to be here, and so there's always going to be a need. Even if you take great care of your facilities, in 60 years, 70 years, you're going to have to build a new school. So it's managing that debt, managing those debt service bills are so important. And so it's thinking about it really more from that standpoint. Is why you don't really see it, is because, I don't care how great you take care of your facilities, 30 years in, there's going to be something. There may be a new technology initiative, you may need new roofs, and you're looking at pushing that debt back down. I have had some districts, very few of them, but some have actually paid off all their debt, but those debt service bills didn't roll off. They had voters move them to M&O because they needed the money to survive. So, permanent, not permanent, I think, 30 years for most people is pretty permanent. So I don't want you to get too hung up on that. But that is the letter of the law. Debt service bills roll off the books when debt pays off. But in practice, do they really? Very rarely. Hopefully that's not a sign.
I'm blind.
Were you involved, Michael, were you involved in the last two millage increases attempts?
Yes, yeah, I've worked with the district. So Stevens has worked with the district. So my father used to do this work, and he did it for almost 45 years, working in this capacity in some. And I know he always, so I don't want to overstate it, but probably for the last 50, 55, 60 years, something like that. Stevens has
Well,
done.
you stated that
I remember his dad.
if you didn't ask for too much, it'd be fairly easy to get it passed, as you just said, right?
Hypothetically.
Now, do you know that every election we have on the ballot asking us yes or no for a millage increase, right? Do you know that?
What's that?
Every ballot we have, every election we have, there is a question on there that says, do you support the millage increase for Pocahontas School District?
Well, so
By the state, it has to be on there, right?
Michael provides that
It's
information.
not an increase, though,
Yeah.
Chad.
No, it's not, but many people think it is.
Yeah,
Many
right.
people are confused, and they vote yes or no for it. Well, the last time it voted, it was about 80% against it,
No, absolutely. I'm not saying that it will be easy. I'm saying it is an information campaign. Getting your information out there will be extremely important. But yeah, that's a state requirement. I don't know why. It's in the Constitution, or they would have changed it. But yeah, you have to revote your mills every single year. That's not a
And it doesn't matter which way it goes, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It's still
What happens if you vote it down?
nothing.
nothing. Exactly. It's just a bureaucratic red tape is all it is.
Yeah.
So.
So no, that's a good point, and you're correct. I mean, there have been some unsuccessful campaigns here since the last successful one. So that definitely does need to be taken into account. Look, I mean, I think if I am y'all, what you need to be thinking about is what are your needs? You can get me, Michael, this is what the end goal is, right? We want this amount in salary increases, and we need this amount of construction funds. And I can put you together that package, and you can say, that's too much of a tax increase for us to go ask voters for. We need to either pare down our salaries, or we need to pare down the project. Because that's really what this comes out to. You've got an amount the state's going to give you. You've got an amount that you've got in your building fund, your savings account, you can apply towards this. And the remainder is what you're going to have to come up with. And typically that is done through a borrowing through bonds. I mean, I don't really know any other way you can do it. You can do a short-term non-bond issue. You're still issuing debt of some capacity. So that's really where it is. It's like, what do we want? What can we get? Where those two meet is
So
what
when talking
people
to
elected you to find out.
But when talking to people in general, just because I don't want to misspeak, so basically $100,000 property value assessment, for every $100,000 they have, it's going to be a $20 increase
Per mill.
per mill.
Now keep in mind, and that's why I said it earlier, people with farmland will run that calculation, and they'll say, well, I can sell this for $6,000, $7,000 an acre, whatever it may be, I would be lying if I knew what farmland was going. That's not what they are assessed at. That's not what their tax bill is. It is much, much lower. It is on the usage of the land, just on farmland. Because a lot of times your farmers will get, they'll start running.
Does that apply to poultry farms as well, though?
No.
Yep. Well, not on the homes, just the land underneath.
Poultry farms are taxed per square foot of a pole barn.
Because they're looking at the barn as more like the.
$9 a square
As
foot.
opposed to the land.
It's still based on usage, but it's just usage of the building or structure.
Right. So, I mean, what you need to get to is, what's the package?
I think that everybody being taxed different in our county is causing a big issue for our millage. Because while yes, row crop farmers are taxed different, I'm taxed different for having my house, or poultry farmers are taxed even higher. Like it's a significant difference. And so I think that we're predominantly poultry community, so it's a struggle. But I don't like, so the last mill increase that our school had was in 18 for the elementary school. And that was 3.34?
That sounds right, yeah.
So why, if the school, you might not know this answer, you might. But if the school anticipated in 18, knowing we were gonna, Gary, knowing we were gonna eventually need a high school, why did we stop at 3.34?
We didn't know.
We were already the lowest.
We didn't know what the price of the high school would be. We didn't know what to ask for.
Or what the state was gonna give them at the time.
Yeah.
either. Because you don't know that until the year of.
Yeah, we didn't know partnership funding. We couldn't build anything without partnership.
But why not get it while you can?
Well, that question really did come up of should we have asked for more. And I think in hindsight, the answer is yes. But going into that election, I think the board felt, Gary, I won't speak for you, but I think the board felt, I gotta come honest to these people I'm voting with and say, this is what we need to accomplish this project.
And then COVID hit.
This isn't, hey, a little fluff number we have because we know we need one down the road. It was, this is what, we've run the calculations, this is what the state's given us, this is what we have in our building fund, and this is what we need to borrow, and this is the millage amount that will accomplish that. And so.
And the fact that we had no idea what the high school would cost.
And that was too, it was, you didn't know what the state funding was gonna be, you didn't know what building costs were gonna be, you
We
didn't know what
had
interest rates were
started
gonna
on
be.
that at that time, every time.
We had some preliminary ideas, but yeah.
Nothing to get it done.
We had kind of, yeah.
So I think this isn't not to shoo you off, Michael, but I think your question is, what is it we need, starts with, kind of looking at Todd and Katie and saying, okay, let's talk about what is it that we need?
I was going to say, have y'all been talking any on this so far as, what is a ballpark number of mills for our future project?
No, we haven't gotten that far.
Oh, okay.
No.
I didn't know if y'all were talking yet on that.
Well, you're probably gonna run these numbers, but we've got 17 million in our savings account. We potentially are gonna get 8 from the state, hopefully 10, okay? And
No, 7.5 is what they
But
quoted.
3 of it goes to Jim if we don't build it right.
so 8 to
We
10,
lose it.
hopefully 10. And then if we borrow 8, whether it's through the millage increase or bond issue, let's say we borrow 8, that's $33 million we have available. We don't wanna spend it all in the high school. Let's say we spend 30. Is that,
Well, and we want to keep,
so maybe,
it's down in our building, right?
What's the square footage?
79.
Yeah. And is that with a gym and a performing arts center?
No,
performing
no
arts?
performance.
Yeah, I definitely think you guys are in the ballpark, yeah. What would that be per square foot? That'd be $79,000.
$350 a square foot, probably.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I'd like to get, go through this conversation with you, do the POR, and then, of course, we've been through this before, and what's required of the state,
380.
and then
Wow.
kind of go from there.
It actually comes to 380 if we use 30 million. So
380
that's square
is a $30 million building at 79,000 square feet.
Yeah, definitely, right now, that sounds very reasonable. You know, what we don't know is what's gonna happen in the next, you know, few months, in the next year. Hopefully.
With the tariffs in the next few days.
Yeah. We bid out, just to give you one real project, we bid out Hoxie last August, came in at like 276. Do I think you can build anything for 276 right now? No, but.
Is that an elementary school or a high school?
It was an elementary school, so it didn't have a big competition gym, but it had a, you know, a kitchen, it had a lot of other stuff. The site work, you know, just, it's a new school. I think things that factor into that, I think it was good timing. I think the subs were looking for work, so I think they got good sub numbers. You know, their proximity to Jonesboro, I don't think, you know, the difference between Hoxie and here is not a big deal, but, you know, the closer you are to Jonesboro, where a lot of the subs are, is helpful. And I think it was a pretty efficient design. You know, dollars per square foot don't matter, but we made it as small as we could. You know, I just think it was an efficient floor plan. Those are the things that can keep the cost down, is if we come up with a good floor plan, we don't waste any space. But yeah, I think 380, you know, after bidding on Hoxie at 276, just not even a year ago, that certainly seems reasonable. Assuming nothing drastic happens.
It is that tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Now-
Assuming nothing drastic happens, I definitely think that's reasonable.
Now, is there possible, I know that, you know, some of these smaller general contractors that do school buildings, but they don't like to do these giant complexes. You know, they're only bonded for, I think, 16 million instead of 25 million. Is there a way to do a building at a time where they do a building here and then the next summer they do another building? Is that feasible with the school and with the regulations from the state?
Yep, I don't see why we couldn't do some phasing.
Because I had
Does that not affect our partnership funding? Do we not have to do it all at once?
well, we do, but it doesn't matter if it,
Yeah, you might be able to
Skips
figure
some.
it out. The state, as you build it, you'll ask for reimbursement payments from the state. That's how they don't just give you the money, they pay you back kind of as you build it. So as long as you get it built by a certain period of time, you'll get all your money.
I think-
Whether or not, if we could bid out, like,
Well, if I remember right, from what Dr. Stein was telling me the last time he and I talked about it, it's more that you have to deliver the full plan, right? I think you have, like, we would have to deliver the full plan on this is what it's gonna look
Yeah,
like.
yeah, we
And
would
then you
have-
could build it over a
Yes.
2-year period.
How could you do that? I mean, like our high school, you know, we got, let's say 500 students, only build certain classrooms.
Well, no, I mean, if you had the gym, like the gym would be a totally separate project than the school itself, to where you could
Yeah.
space it out. Because the reason why Chad's bringing that up is because if you don't, you take these guys that are only bonded for 25 million, there are only 4 of them in the state that build it, versus you drop it down to 16, now we got 25 people that can bid on it. That keeps your cost
I
down.
think even Tate and Clark Construction on Walnut Ridge, I think both of those guys are about 16 million bonded, and they're not willing to take on a $25 million project. But, you know, there's very few contractors out there, as you know, that are willing to do a $25 million bond.
yeah.
And so, I think the more local, as you know, we're involved in our bathroom remodel. We ended up paying $44,000 to get it painted, which could have done locally for $8,000, you know. And if we can get the more local builders, general contractor to use more local labor, we can get that number way down below 300, you know. Even 300 is doable. I've been ballpark 300, 250 by Clark and Walnut Ridge. But like I said, they're willing to do a 40 or 50,000 square foot building, but they're not wanting to do an 80.
Sure.
But if they can do 2 buildings, they would do that, you know.
Yeah,
Well, that's a good idea, what you're talking, you know, we could build a high school building and then follow up with the gym.
That's all in how you gotta
The-
think though.
the
You gotta
only
tear a
thing-
gym down and then what are you gonna do with the kids? And then
That's.
if you're
what I've
waiting
heard.
to build it
That's
a
why
year
it's like,
later.
yeah, that's where you're gonna be at, because
You're waiting on a
You're
cafeteria,
just that
you
much
can't
longer.
do that.
Well,
Yeah.
remember I proposed last year about just tearing these few small buildings down right here. We build a 40,000 square foot. We move everybody in the high school besides the math and science wing. We move them into that over the summer. That's where they go to school the next year. We tear the oldest building down in the high school. We keep the math and science wing, and then we rebuild another 40,000 square footer beside that, and the gym is in that. And it works out with the elevation too because of your grade for your gym. So that was my proposal, where you don't ever have a lapse of students not having a classroom, you know. Where you build 40,000 one year, you have a full 14 months to build it in, because you're starting, you know, entire school year, and then through the summer, they move back in, and then you tear down the other one and do the same 14-month cycle again, you know. That, I think, is the best idea, but, you know, you've been a lot more involved in tonight.
I mean, you put the numbers to it, you know, in the end, I mean, the ideal things will be along the same time.
I mean,
you know.
The other idea is to tear it all down and throw the kids elsewhere in the school system for a whole year, basically, right? I mean, that's probably about a year turnaround to get, and of course, you're using a lot larger contractor. That's going to be a lot more expensive for us. So.
But everybody thought, what can we do? You got anything? I mean, go to the POR and all that.
Yeah, so we'll put the POR together with Dr. Stein, and that's kind of what he specializes in. Are you guys looking at doing 10 through 12?
No, 9.
9 through 12? So he'll help us with that, and he'll revise it based on the numbers. He's probably already done one for the partnership application. But yeah, the POR tells us what spaces we have to have in the building and how big they need to be. And we can get a little creative with that, but for the most part, you know, it just tells you the spaces you have to have. At Hoxie, I'll give you an example of how we can try and save a little bit of money if we need to. Hoxie wanted bleachers in their gym. The state doesn't really pay for that extra square footage, so Hoxie has to pay for that all on their own. At the same time, they had a couple of spaces that they were required to have that they didn't want. So we were able to put those where the bleachers were going to be. There's a little odd, but they let us do it. So we essentially had the state help pay for some spaces that normally they wouldn't help pay for. So we could look at those kinds of things in the POR.
What did you say the square footage was?
79,000
Have you
is what
seen
they.
that some schools are utilizing their safe room, like in a gymnasium? Like I think our school, the school our size, does it just have to house 9 through 12, or does it have to house nearby?
It'll have to house 9 through 12. So
Okay.
if you build a new high school, you count up how many kids are going to be in the high school, and you have to build a safe shelter big enough.
But like we had talked about the football fields right there, you know, the public was out there if we needed to come in. So are schools utilizing that as their gym, or are they using other spaces?
We have done it multiple ways. I haven't done a gym. A gym with that big span would be expensive. It's not to say people haven't done that, but it might be more expensive to do your gym than some other spaces. We have been doing a lot where we take a few classrooms, and especially if the classrooms don't have any windows, because to have a window in a tornado shelter, you can do that, but you either have to buy a very expensive window, or you have to have like a shutter. But if you have some classrooms that don't have any windows, those become pretty good spaces for tornado shelters.
I question, some of these gyms in our area are like multi-leveled and they're poured concrete, and is that something that you could put maybe classrooms on the lower level and that be a space where it's connected to the gym, but it's...
Yep.
Also, locker rooms, we're
Yeah.
doing that currently, that's
At
what
Corning,
they
we're
would like
taking
to
their
do
locker
theirs.
rooms.
Yeah,
You know, they have concrete bleachers in their gym.
Right.
So we're putting the tornado
underneath there.
shelter underneath there.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to like, whatever we could say, like, we've got to have these
Well-
safe rooms, where we could put them.
So for
what's
400,
utilizing-
400 kids, how many square foot would you need for a safe room?
400, about 20,000 square feet.
There's more than that in the high
But
school.
if
500
you build
kids.
a competition gym, it gets a little tricky. Is it, don't you have to like look at the overall amount of people that would fit in that gym when you're figuring how big the safe
You
shelter?
have to,
So however many of its seat has to be.
Yeah, so it's whatever the bigger number is. If it's your gym or your school, you pick the bigger number, and that's how many you have to put in the tornado shelter. And unfortunately, when you calculate amount of kids that have to fit in the tornado shelter. The state requires us to, I'll kind of explain, we have to use this inflated number. So in a typical classroom, you can have 25 kids, you know, is that about right?
On average, yes, sir.
So logic would tell you that you should count 25 kids per classroom for your tornado shelter. They require us to take the square footage of the classroom, which is 850 square feet, and divide that by 20 net square feet per kid, which you end up with like 45 kids per classroom. That's how many we have to count that go in the tornado shelter. It's just kind of, that's how the state fire marshal has made us do it. Now, we only have to count the classrooms and the office spaces, so we don't have to count the cafeteria and the library and some of those other spaces, because they know that those same kids that are in the classrooms are also going to the library, and usually they're not doubling up. But they do require us to build these tornado shelters bigger than they actually need to be. Now, that's not a problem. I mean, that just means that you have a little bit more room, you know, for other kids, maybe people from the community, but it is unfortunate.
So, I mean, you probably know somewhat cost. Is it running like $20 a square foot more for a tornado shelter room, or 30, or what?
I would say more like half of. If your square feet is, or if you're like $300 a square foot.
It's gonna be $450.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty pricey, but that's why we look for, you know, if you got a room that's got some concrete block already, it's got, it's only. I mean, you have to put a concrete lid over it, you have to provide ventilation, or you have to have a generator that powers the HVAC system during an event. You have to have lights that stay on if the power goes out. There's certain things we have to do, but we're always looking for the least expensive way to do it. The key is to designate a perimeter, that your tornado shelter is inside this perimeter, and you want to minimize how many doors are in that perimeter, because the doors are about $8,000 to $10,000 a piece, as opposed to maybe $2,000 for a regular door with the hardware and everything. So like, let's say you're looking at a classroom corridor. All those doors that go into the classrooms would have to be tornado shelters. But if you take a couple of classrooms and include the corridor, then you might have some doors at the end of the corridor that are in that perimeter, but no other doors.
So if you had a wing of 10 classrooms and a hallway, you could take off that whole side, and those 10 classrooms would be the tornado section, as long as you're 20 to 25,000.
But they can't have windows in them?
They prefer not to.
They can, but the windows are about $20,000.
So,
I
guess I just don't, I don't know, I guess I thought, why, if you're doing concrete bleachers in a gym, why you can't go underneath on both sides and just house the whole school?
We can look at that. At Corning, we were trying to get, you know, we have locker rooms under there. Locker rooms are great for tornado shelters because they don't have any windows. You don't have a lot of furniture in there, so you can count all the space. So they work out great. We were hoping to fit everybody under the bleachers at Corning, but we had to, it was not big enough. So we had to kind of start to take some classrooms that were near the gym, but they didn't have windows. It was like the band room and the art room, and we didn't have any windows. So we designated that perimeter around there and minimized how many doors entered into it. It was a pretty efficient way to do it, but we couldn't fit everybody in those rooms.
I just think that utilizing the gym for the community, I think they would look at, oh, we want to build a new gym, but here we have to have a tornado shelter too.
Yeah.
And so it's like this, they kind of fit together. It makes more sense to sell it as, this is our tornado shelter. It's big enough for the community if we're at a basketball game. It's big enough if we're at a football game.
Yeah.
The problem is making
in the design that, you know, that we had, there was, correct, Coach, underneath the bleachers, it was all dressing rooms and, you know, storage and had a.
Because there's nowhere, I mean, there's nowhere in the community to open up if tornadoes are coming.
Well, and that's something you try to sell to the community, I mean, especially now.
I think that is under the old plan, if you still do it, and that, on this end, that's partially underground.
Right.
So that's a plus.
But I just think it's a good way to promote it to the community. If we combine it with the gym, then you can open it up and, oh, we can fit 1,500 people in here. if, you know,
Well, I think
whatever.
that would be good for the community, because we really, if we could open it up, like the instance we had last week,
Right.
in fact, we could.
Or, I
It
mean, last year we
doesn't end
evacuated a
there.
football game
I mean,
because.
where do
it
we
was-
have a storm shelter in Pocahontas?
There isn't, not one like that.
St. Paul's, I think, where most people go. I'm not sure it's a,
It's not even really approved, I wouldn't.
Would there
think.
be any additional funding we could possibly get from the state if we worked in conjunction with the city on something like that?
The state doesn't offer any funding for this tornado shelter as it is now with their bills that they're talking about introducing, but there's nothing right now. Hopefully, maybe by the time.
Could the city contribute money?
Would FEMA help at all?
FEMA's funding is pretty well dried up right now. But yeah, well, it's something you can look at. FEMA, we've done a lot of tornado shelters in the past with FEMA money, but it kind of has slowed down.
so you would say, let's use our, what size, safe room would we need? How many square feet? These are present numbers.
Yeah, how many kids are in the school?
Be 500, let's say,
How
right?
many people are
1,800.
on your gym?
Just in the high school.
Just
No,
now.
but he was asking the total number of kids, so that would be, how many per grade roughly?
150, 163, 122,
It's just in the high school?
Well, just a high school looking at.
150.
Plus 151
At
out
least 700 kids if you go through 4 grades.
But you're gonna want your gym to hold more.
But
of
now,
that.
we also
Yeah.
said,
So the gym might be the driver.
if we.
Correct.
Probably
You would
550.
have to use the number of the largest number that uses that.
If you can find 9th grade though, it's up.
Yeah.
So,
Why
if we
divide
built
it?
an 1,800
Total.
seat gym,
About
that's
13
what
grades.
we proposed.
Yeah, so if you had, say, 1,200, my number, I had a zero before, so it's not,
But you gotta include some.
2,000 square feet.
Oh, so you don't have to be 20, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome.
But,
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's a lot of classrooms.
yeah, so if you had a 1,200 seat gym, and that was a driving factor, that'd be about a 6,000 square foot shelter.
Okay.
Then it becomes where do you put it? You know, because classrooms that, again, everything's kind of working against these schools when you do these tornado shelters. Because they only allow us to count 65% of the square footage of the classroom, because we have to deduct the square footage of the desks and chairs, which is kind of silly, because a kid can get on the desk and chair. And especially if it's an elementary school, because you're talking about little kids, so they can fit a lot of kids in these tornado shelters. But anyway, so 6,000 would be the bare minimum. If you had like just a big wide open space with no furniture, that'd be 6,000 square feet, and you need to house 1,200 people. It's 5 square feet per
Well,
person.
the gym would be, well, 18 is what we were looking for, it'd be 1,800.
So 1,800
at least. It's either 1,800 or 2,000 to be it on a region or a state.
So you're getting up close to like 9,000 square feet.
Okay.
Um,
I guess the point I'm trying to make, how much additional cost is that just for the tornado?
50%.
Yeah, it's gonna be basically time and a half, so.
Probably, if you put it in space, you're already gonna build about 1.35 million additional cost to make the tornado shelter happen.
Well,
If
I
you
mean,
didn't.
that sounds like a lot of money, but I really
I
like.
just know from a community standpoint,
All right,
if you're
if we can
selling.
sell this to community, that this would be a.
Right now would be a really good time to
It
sell.
would.
Yes.
I mean, and I think, and we're all here, we're all community people, and we're for our community and we're for our schools, but if we can accomplish both, I think that's a good thing that we could use.
I know I've been in a couple gyms lately that I wouldn't mind being in their like lower level under those bleachers because it's solid concrete. I mean, Blytheville being one of them, Highland being one of them, Sloan Hendricks. I mean, they got classrooms all up under their gym.
And the way that Todd designed this before, you know, there's quite a bit of that. Well,
It's a
that-
pretty
the-
good space.
The bleachers are not even the level.
So if you have
Everything's underground.
If you have a 18,000 square foot gym, you potentially could fit 7,500 square foot under the bleachers, I guess.
Okay.
7,500 or,
And you got 3
What'd you say?
ends to it, you could do, I mean,
you said 6,000 square foot would be bare minimum for
That
1,800
was
people.
That would be 1,200 people. 9,000 would be better.
9,000, okay.
18,000.
So You might have to go 22,000 square foot gym to get 9,000 square foot under the bleachers, but it's probably doable.
Like what we did at Corning, you know, we had some classrooms that were nearby that we could capture. But yeah, we could design the gym. If we knew how many seats you had and that was the driving factor, we could make sure we figure out a good way to provide enough space.
Yeah.
I know that's what's required, but in the real world, you know, you're gonna have, if you've got an 1,800, if we've got an 1,800, we're probably not gonna have over 1,000 people there, unless it's a tournament.
And I know if there's enough square foot for 1,800 people and you got 2,000 people in there, they're all gonna fit. I mean, who's gonna be checking them off? Well, you other 200 can't come. Yes.
And there's lots of space, you could probably utilize that for lockers, like you said, under the bleachers and other stuff, probably.
Well, the way that was designed, and I'm thinking back to those plans that you drew on Jim, that all fits. That would work for United States Red Plus. It's gonna be utilized for all the kids. I mean,
I'd hate to know the bill for tornado proofing the roof of that structure, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you've even got it there if the fair is going on. I mean, like I said, they made us leave a football game last year, and we were all standing outside at the fair, and it was blowing up a huge storm, but there was nowhere to go. So.
Well, details will be figured out later, I'm sure.
yeah, that's good to know that that's the approximate cost just for the tornado shelter.
Yeah, if you built a standalone tornado shelter, they're running like $500 a square foot. So because you're already, you know, if we use space you're already going to build, it's just a matter of being as creative as possible to minimize the cost. Well, if you got a 2-story building, I've talked to my structural engineer. It's a little tricky if people. I guess bleachers are okay because the same engineer was okay with our bleachers, but he told me that it's kind of tricky to build like classrooms over a tornado shelter. Because I have a project that was already going to have a second floor, and I'm like, hey, it's going to have this slab. That's perfect. But my engineer said that the way the building code reads, it's kind of difficult to have occupiable space over the tornado shelter. But again, you can do it with the
gym.
Yeah, it's the same guy that designed our gym, so gym.
Well, I think is what I guess we were talking about is, you know, I think we're gonna need to come up with a number at some time, right? At some point.
Well, yes. I also think, you know, that number is going to be built off of, right, how much, you know, what are we going to build? 79,000 square feet, the way I understand it, is going to be the sort of the minimum.
Right. And I think that, and here's what we ran into before, are you building it for growth? That's one big question we got. Well, we could afford to build it for growth. That's only going to pay for current enrollment.
I think if you leave the math and science wing there, because it's what, 30 years old or less?
We have to leave the math and science wing there.
You're going to have plenty of space for growth on an 80,000 square foot.
Well, it's still what we utilize, I think.
Well, I mean, and I'm going to back up. I mean, the state is only going to fund what we need, not what we would expect to do.
But and that's what we know in this room, but when we start telling the public, you know, it's one of the big questions. Why aren't y'all building it bigger for growth? And that's what we answer. This is all the money we have.
Right.
You know, and that's the way it works. But up there, would the cafeteria be separate from the high school? That's the question that I had. You know, in the last plan, we had it underneath it. I think we prefer that to be separate, or not separate, but tied on. And the idea was, Craig and Christian, you know, what's the real building? Do you want a cafeteria in there with classrooms on top? That would not be, to me, the best.
I wouldn't think so.
You know what I'm talking about, you know, like.
Yeah, at the old design, it was 2 stories and we had space above the cafeteria.
Right.
So here's something. Can you put a cafeteria underneath of a gym? There's no really weight on a gym.
Yeah, you could certainly do that.
And can that cafeteria be the tornado shelter?
Yeah.
So that's an idea, and we have a really unlevel spot that would be great for it, you know?
Yeah, you could do that.
I mean, the cafeteria is naturally a good place to get.
What do you mean under the gym?
Well, I'm talking about taking down the oldest building in a line is 300 foot long, right? The farther it gets this way, it drops about 8 foot,
But see,
maybe
that's
10
where the
foot.
gym's gotta go down there because of the elevation, because the gym will be at a lot lower level.
We were saying sink the cafeteria.
Sink the cafeteria
on
down,
top of it.
yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, before what we did is we had the gym lower.
Yeah.
You walked in from the main
Yeah.
level of the high school to the
Yeah.
second level. of the
Yeah,
gym.
but then the cafeteria would be our natural tornado shelter, and it would hold plenty of people, you know?
Yeah, you could do that. then-
And you'd be in the ground, sorta.
And it's close, you know, you could work out your service, because you always want to have trucks be able to make deliveries to the cafeteria.
Yes,
So
yeah.
since it's not going over where we had it before,
Mm-hmm.
because that's rock on the stand.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, now, in this, I guess the question I had, you know, we got the old part of the national science thing. You know, before, you know, we were gonna go back in there, and, you know, that would be, would we take out the existing gym? I guess would be a big question. I would hope, or see what possibility. Here's my vision, to keep that, the old gym, for two reasons. I know you can't put kids back in it, but when you start disturbing that hillside over there, I know Navajo's had a real issue with it, that it all the way, I mean, it's gonna be very expensive to stabilize that hill over there. You know,
When
like.
Dr. Stein applied, I don't know if he applied demolishing that gym or not.
I mean, remember, they called us and we had a meeting on that whole thing, and in order to, and they talked about, they were gonna give us, you know, it was basically an additional, I think, $3 million.
Yes.
If we took the gym down. So,
We'd have to take it down.
you have to take it down.
Let her go. I know Slum Hangers kept their gym.
But their money was donated, like to build the new gym.
Well, I know, yeah, they didn't get partnership
Yeah.
funding for it.
Yeah,
And,
that's,
and, you know, it's used by the community now.
Yeah.
And the school. Not their school hours.
yeah, when
The
they.
school, they had like PE and stuff in the old gym, I think.
I know. Hey, we want the money, we'll walk the line.
Surprised they didn't get a, I'm glad they didn't, but yeah, I wasn't sure. That they,
Hey, we'll buy there.
yeah, it's wild, done.
Well, I know, you know, the first.
Well, we even got approval,
It was
we
supposed
could
to be
sell all
demolished.
that, it's gonna stay in the
Yeah.
Locked that
Yeah.
thing around a long time. I was afraid they was gonna come and get us, haul us all off. Because it was supposed to be demolished 3 years ago.
So
But
what's
then we
our
also got approval
on
that we
having,
could sell it.
hey, this is our vision, these are our plans, this is how much it's gonna cost, this is if we need to, like, request a mill, or don't request a mill, or we got bonds coming out in 2 years.
Okay, so I'm gonna come back to Michael a little bit, right? If I understand what he said earlier, you know, we have to have decisions made about bonds, restructuring, all of that by around 1st of August, end of July, 1st of August, to be able to do all the paperwork to get ready for a November 18th election.
You've got a little, that's conservative, but yeah, I think that's a good timeline to,
But not for a bond, not election. Election doesn't have anything to do with the bond.
well,
Says it on the
the
ballot.
restructuring,
It
yes.
has to go.
It has to go in the ballot too.
I mean, you could do the second lien bond that we were kind of alluding to, I don't think.
So if we paid it off $575,000, we don't have to do an election, right?
But then
Yeah,
you lose your millage.
You would, because you just
On
lose the
extended
millage.
You're extending the millage, not
Oh, okay,
necessarily
gotcha.
To
that.
minimize the impact on your annual payment.
Yeah.
You're gonna need to do the restructuring, which requires a vote.
Okay.
You're extending the tax.
So either one is a vote, okay.
Yeah, you're gonna need to vote regardless of whether you add a mill or not. In my opinion, from what I've heard today, right, that could change, but, you know, you could decide we just want to do a straight up second lien bond, which would not require a vote, but it's not gonna really give you the maximum amount of benefit that there was structure anyway.
So let me ask you this, and you're saying combining, so what if we did the bond increase, but also asked for a meal and it got shot down because nobody wants the extra meal, wouldn't we have to still go back?
You'd have to
And
go
do a
back.
second one to get the bond extended?
So why would you not just separate them on the vote?
Because it's like a bump or two.
State law won't allow you to. It's fun how we have all these little things that like logically would make sense.
That's
State
the
law won't
government's
let you.
fault, they can't be allowed.
So the next step would be, we know what size building we need, getting a plan together, it's gonna cost X amount.
So the way I see it, I mean, and again, you guys jump in, right? But what facilities told us is that we would hear in April/May on funding for partnership money.
Right.
Right, and that's where they originally said 7.5 million, you know, if who knows what it's gonna be when it gets there, it could be 8, you know, yeah, in a great world, it might be more than that. I don't necessarily expect it to be, but I think it could be, right? I mean, that's a possibility. So I'm landing on 7.5 to 8 is where we're at. Then it comes down to, okay, you know, if Todd's telling us that, or if we're telling Todd our number is 30 million, and whatever we can build for 30 million is what we're gonna do, right? Knowing that we do have 17 in the building fund, but in my opinion, I would caution the board from using the entire 17 million,
Maybe 10 of it?
right? I would,
On to 7, or what's your figure?
I would say leaving 3 to 4 million in the,
At least.
You can still do a 30.
That's what you've always told us.
Yeah, the way I look at it, and look at it.
More is better.
Well, the way I look at it, and this is just kind of because you gotta start somewhere, right? I look at what credit rating agencies say school districts should have in reserves to be in the A to AA credit category. So AAA is the best, you know, you can go all the way down to like D and F, but like A to AA, that's investment quality, right? They want 25 to 30% of your annual revenues stored away. So you can be real aggressive with that and say, that's just our carrying balance. But in my mind, I would say it needs to probably be a lot of that needs to be your building fund. Because what I don't want you to do is you build this nice new building and then something happens to a roof over here and now you're forced to borrow because you have to have the money. Or you know, a hailstorm comes through and insurance doesn't quite cover what you need to replace 5 new roofs, and instead of having a couple million where you can utilize it, because look, it could be that happens and you do determine to borrow because you do an analysis and say interest rates are this and it makes more sense to borrow. But you don't want to be in the situation you have to borrow, right? That's what I want to avoid you from. So that's why we kind of arrived at the 3 to 4 million. That's not to say that's what you have to do. It's just that's how we've arrived at that number. We've looked at what credit rating agencies would say would make some sense, and then backed into that number to your book.
Well, 88,000 square feet at $300 a square foot, that's $24 million. So I think if we do 24 million, so I feel like we can easily do something between 24 and 28, you know?
300 square feet's low, right? I mean, that's $300.
We just said Oxy did it a year ago, 276.
Well, that's the number they can't.
and that's an elementary.
That's not the final
Elementary
number.
school.
That's
Okay,
just-
Todd, let me ask you this. Is it, when you compare the cost of building an elementary school to the cost of building a high school, are they equal?
They're comparable.
Okay.
They're not
The
vastly.
gym would be the
But
caveat
there's a
that throws it
gym,
off.
did Hoxie build a new cafeteria?
Yeah, I would probably recommend budgeting 350 a square foot just to be safe. You know, I'd probably have that number in my.
So that would run around 28 million.
And Corning will bid out in the next
Yeah, we're
month
gonna
or
know about
two,
Corning.
and that's a high school, and we'll have a better
Yeah,
idea.
good
as to
gauge.
what it
Yeah,
is.
that will be a good gauge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but now is that, I know the square footage among the same as gymnasium, this classroom.
A lot of open
I'd
space.
say, I don't know, I've never broken it down, but I would say gyms might be a little bit more. But you got a lot of open space, but you also have the bleachers and usually got, maple hardwood floors that are a lot of, scoreboards and, the basketball goals. They get kind of pricey, especially if you have a lot of bleachers.
Well, that and then the classrooms. I mean, you have to put desks in and boards and.
Well, Well, like
Computer,
they're
I mean-
elementary gyms, but the Middleton gyms were higher per square foot
Those were
cost.
pretty,
And those were just gym projects with 2 or 4 classroom additions.
yeah.
And it was closer to 400, wasn't
They
it?
were, but they're also smaller scale. You know,
Yeah.
the bigger your project gets, the
Cheaper
more
per
economy of
square
scale
foot.
you get. So if you're building just a gym, it can be $400 a square foot. If you're building a gym as part of a big high school, then $330, you know, for the same gym.
But you would know the square footage. The square footage is strictly classroom, places capture.
No.
No, what I remember from what Dr. Stein told me, the PORs for our size of our enrollment, POR is going to require 79,000 square feet ballpark.
For everything.
For classrooms.
Yes,
So the gym would be an addition.
I would think so.
Well, you're gonna have way too much.
But
space.
here's the other thing. Now, let me ask, I might, because, you know, you have to have a PE space, right? So some of that, am I right, is covered under the PE standards. It's when you start putting in what it takes to be a competition gym that they're not gonna start paying for.
But
But,
like maybe 9,000 square feet
yeah,
for the gym.
I mean, but the truth is, you know, this community has a high school with a basketball team. It's going to need a competition gym.
And let's build it right the first time. Let's build something that'll last for 60 years, 70.
So really, we should have kept that 4.5 million about 2 years ago.
No, it would have hardly had been spent.
Let's say I told you so.
No problem.
But you had to have it, but you had to spend.
We had to have it
5 years.
already,
5
we've
years.
already had to have it allocated.
5
would we
years.
Not have?
5 years.
But you had to allocate it though.
With
Yeah.
every-
Yeah, there were some yield issues that we would have had to work through that could have been,
Well, I think we learned a lot.
Can I, just to put a pin in it, I just think, if I'm in y'all's position, a lot of times you can chase what you want and think about, we can move things, we do this. I think what's really important to think about is what you can get done with the community. I think y'all need to think about it yourself. Can we get a millage increase done? Or what do we want to get done? Do we need to get salaries addressed? Do we need to do that with a millage increase? You need to think about that, because then that can get you to your budget. And then you can figure out, do we save money by moving the storm shelter? But if you can't start with, okay, here's roughly what we think we can afford, and this is what our plan of attack's gonna be, you can sometimes get lost in the weeds, because I mean, I'm glad I don't work on that, because the moving the buildings, moving the kids, so sometimes it's easier to start and say, can we get yes or no, can we get a millage increase passed in this community? And if you can answer that to yourselves, then you can start from somewhere. If the answer to that is just flat out, no, it doesn't matter what we do, okay, well then, it looks like you're looking at a restructuring, okay, if we're just gonna do a restructuring, can we afford any additional bond debt in our current budget? Now, if we're trying to address salaries, the answer to that may be no. But if the answer to that is yes, then, okay, you can build out your budget from there.
Well, I think if we tie a millage increase with, increasing the salaries for the faculty, I think that'll get us probably 10 votes for each teacher. I think it'll go a long ways in the support for it.
So, and I'm just saying, I'm not saying one way or the other what you're gonna, I'm just saying, I think that's a good way to start. Is to think, what can we get done with the community, then that gets you to a budget number. And then you can move from there. And then you can say, this is what we want to do.
And I do think, I mean, to Michael's point, in doing a little bit more of a deep dive historically on how the district has spent the revenues that are coming in just from more of like a 15,000 foot view, I think there's some room in the current budget to do some things. But that's a conversation that we can have on, what does that look like, and how I think a question that we can wrestle with is, right now, Michael has shown you that there is a surplus of you know, last year was $900,000, you know, going back, I mean, it's not been that high before, but, I mean, if you go back a few years, you're looking at 650,000. One year, you know, 2019, it was $1 million, right? What has the district done with the excess debt service? And the short answer is, I think we put it in the building fund. It's not a bad decision to make, right? But if you have an extra $650,000 on top of the money that was already budgeted to go into the building fund, then can you do some other things like salaries with that excess debt service?
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I also think that when you're doing that, though, now you're talking about making a permanent commitment. Now that amount that you took out of there is permanently gone. Like you can't go back and put it back in there. And I also think there's been some things in the school district that got neglected to get to that point that are gonna have to now go back and address. So I think you're still kicking the can down the road. It's gonna be a while before you actually know what your excess is gonna be, in my opinion, just because I think there's so many things that got neglected to get to the point it's at now.
So we want to figure it out today, what we're leaning towards, everyone?
Well, I mean, that's up to the pleasure of the board. I mean, I think there are some.
We're looking at April now, and we got one more meeting before June.
What was your question?
Do we want to figure out where we're leaning towards, everyone on the board?
Oh, yeah.
Sit down.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well,
You don't want to stand any longer, Todd?
I think what we really need is Todd, to put preliminary, this is what you need, and this is what it's gonna cost.
Well, remember, like Michael said, we don't need to get the cart before the horse. We need to figure out what we're going to do first.
Yeah, but we don't know how much money we need to the space. We don't-
He's ballparked it. You know, you don't want him doing a lot of legwork if
No, we don't.
we don't get approved in November.
But we need a approximate, what the gym and things, and what you gotta remember is, that's what we got into before. You know, to furnish that building, you got architect fees, you got technology fees, you're talking about a couple $1 million.
If I'm understanding, we can say, hey, Todd, work us up a $28 million budget, and you can probably come up with some pretty good ideas, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, why would we have him do the legwork if we haven't figured out how we're going to get the money? You know, we've got to figure out how to get the money first.
Well,
And
I
whether
know
that's
what you mean. No,
whether
I
that's a
agree.
millage increase, because right now our deadline is June or so to have, right, we don't want to drag it through the summer without knowing what we're doing for the election. So I feel like we need to figure out in the next month or 6 weeks what we're going to do, whether it's going to be a millage increase or a bond.
Well, we do have to know what our partnership funding is going to be.
Yes.
And when you said you know that.
And if they come back with 17 million in partner funding, well, we won't be having this conversation, but I don't think they are. You know, you said 8 million, but maybe 10. So
But
we
either
kind of
way,
know.
we need something on the ballot, so we still have to have an
Yes.
idea.
Well, I think you're right, we gotta have, approximately what the building's gonna cost, or all the costs to go with it. But you're talking about a couple more $1 million outside of construction, for technology, furnishing,
Yeah.
architect fees.
Well, and I'm gonna come back, okay, so, I mean, what I did was I ran the last 10 years worth of building transfers and debt service, and, in essence, for 7 of the last 11 years, the district has moved into the building fund the budgeted transfer and the entirety of the surplus. Okay? I mean, this is something that you've talked about the last couple of months, Chad, right? Each year, if you just work backwards, the district budgeted 600,000 last year to go into the building fund, and we moved in, the surplus was 980,000. So of that $4 million that we moved into the 3,200 account, $1.5 million of that was the surplus and the budgeted transfer. The year before, you had the same thing, 942,000 of the 1.5 million that was transferred was the entirety, 100% of the surplus, which was 442,000, and the budgeted amount, which was $500,000. The year before that, 1.3 million of the 1.7 was the entire surplus plus the budget transfer. So in essence, the district has not, they have saved, and there's, I mean, we have saved the entirety of the debt surplus for every year going back to 2017 except 2019.
But we've also let our buildings fall apart.
And I'm, you know, all I'm saying is, I think one of the discussions that we should be having is the expectation to save the entire amount of the debt surplus from year to year?
I would say, no, that was kind of what me and Chad were talking about the last meeting, using that money to give the teachers a raise.
And that's what I'm talking about. But you are right. It is going to be a commitment every year. So what percentage, right? I think that's a good conversation. What percentage of that debt surplus every year, whether that debt surplus is $1 million or whether it's, you know, $300,000, what percentage of that debt surplus do you want to use for, you know, salaries, for instance? Here's the other thing. You could, and this goes back to Michael's point, right? You could say, because our debt surplus every year is, you know, for the last, since 2019, it's been at least $600,000. It's averaged about $650,000, that debt surplus, since 2019. Well, if that's the case, and we can get $1 million for $240,000, then all of a sudden that's a mill that we can put towards the construction that we don't have to ask the community for. Right? And so, I mean, to me, it's one of those things where do we want to use the debt surplus for saving that every year in the building fund? That's an option, right? To start providing raises. Now, what that does is that's going to get us, we're going to start creeping up on that operating, you know, our foundation for money, but that's okay because I think that's okay. And the reason why is because I hear this group talking about going to the community to ask for millages to increase raises. Well, we don't have to do that. We've got it built in here. We're just going to have to talk about coming off the 78 to 82% a little bit. And the longer, you know, now I've done this a couple of years, and I think that's okay to start fluctuating that a little bit. But there's also been sort of a perception, I think, that because when you look back for the last, you know, since the last year of the debt service mills being 4.37, this district has put back at least $750,000 into the building fund every year.
Yeah, the way I look at it, if you're basing this off of mills, you're saying 224 per mill. Just the basic raises we were just talking about, if you did it all in 1 year, was going to be what, almost 400,000, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's in the salary. It's in that.
So that's like 1.75 mills, and to me, I think those raises that even though it's just a starting point, is nowhere near the end point where they need to be. So you're still looking at a much more substantial commitment to get salaries where they need to be. I'm not talking about what we're trying to do right now, but where they need to be long term. Even if you stair step it, that money, because once it's committed, is never coming back.
On that $7.9 million, if we increased our bond to that, what would be that? Would it be about $500,000 a year? On top of what we're doing now, or is that?
No, to the 7.9, no, it'd be roughly $225,000.
Oh, that's it, wow.
Takes it to $1 million, so it's the restructuring.
Okay.
Plus $1 million is what that chart's trying to show you.
So Gary, if you want to spend $32 million on a high school, we can borrow $10 million and be out another, $350,000 a year. He told us that we have available $900,000 a year, right? But we don't, he said, I don't recommend you don't use it all, you know what I mean? But that would be something if you did want to
Well,
go.
I think we've done several projects here, and that's how we did it without raising millage. When we built the gym, we built the match.
That's the way I'm leaning
We
towards.
reconstructed our bond,
Yeah.
but they were $2 or $3 million projects.
Yeah.
Let me make sure I'm understanding this though. You're still limited on how much you can restructure that bond based on the current millage though, are you not?
No, so like the restructuring, when I say restructuring as a standalone, it's just a math problem to say, we're not gonna exceed your total payment of $775,000 with the constraints of the 30-year financing and an assumed 5% interest rate. That generates a bond issue of $5,235,000 under those constraints. If you say, increase my payment higher than my current amount, that's when you come down to this bottom part. And that's how you're getting more construction funds from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But to your point, the answer to what you asked is actually yes, because you could not exceed the payment to the surplus, right? So you can't have that surplus go beyond zero. But what I'm showing you here, even up to 3 mills that would generate you $14.5 million. Let's say you don't bring in 3 new mills, you increase it 225,000 times 3.
So
That's what
Now,
I'm doing.
which brings me back to what I was saying. So now that surplus, if you dedicate it to salaries, which is gone forever, and then you don't increase the millage to try to get it, and you have to increase and borrow 10 million, it's gone. Now you're operating at zero.
Not 10, 14. He said.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't have a vote, but it makes sense to me that you look at how much is the district willing to commit of the surplus to increasing the debt payment, right? And how do we bring, let's say what we said is we need 2 mills. Well, in essence, what I'm hearing Michael say is the school district could say, look, we're going to step up, take it out of our existing budget. It's going to cost us $225,000 every year. That still leaves us, like last year, that still would have left us over $700,000 in surplus, right? And community, will you share that with us? We'll take on a mill as the district. We're now asking for just 1 mill, right? So now everybody's got some skin in the game.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's the way most districts do it. I don't think I've ever heard of a district, and it's a good idea, that's designated strictly for salaries. But one district doing this did it.
I just want to point out though, okay, so before I was on the board, the biggest part of the community and what I heard was the school wants us to increase our mills because they want to build a new high school, yet MD Williams is in the condition it's in. The school wants us to increase our mills because they want to build a new high school, yet I graduated in 2002 and this is the same tile that was here 30 years ago. I mean, it's the same windows that were here 30 years ago. You see what I mean? Like, I don't like the idea of saying, okay, we're designating all of this to, I'm agreeing with going up on salary, but we still can't ignore the rest of the district.
Well, I don't think we're ignoring the rest of the district. I think we're doing it as projects.
But I mean, the bathroom project was huge this year. So
well, it was, and I mean, we've already started talking about, like, I'd like to redo the floors in this building,
yeah.
right? The question becomes, if we're not willing to bite it off in little bits, and we're going to do this a little bit now and this a little bit now, if what I'm hearing you say is, we don't want to do a high school until we do all this other thing.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like $750,000, and we're saying we're going to take $500,000 of it and put it towards teacher salaries. That's wonderful. But can we do everything we need just leaving the $250 when we have $500,000 bathroom projects pop up?
Well, I ran my numbers the last few meetings.
Yeah, no, I get you.
That we're putting, over the last 4 years, I think I've proved that we're putting $2.3 million in our savings account every year for the last 4 years.
This is what we put in the last 11 years. that column right there.
4.7?
That was
Add it
last
all
year.
together.
Nope,
Yeah.
that was last year. This was the year before.
Okay.
This was the year, so.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, how many years?
Well, I mean, that's each one's a year, so that's 11 years total.
So that's running around almost 2 million, 1.6 million a year. So over the last 4 years, it was 2.3. Let's say we're just doing 1.5 million a year, right? Let's drop it down to 1.5. We can take 500,000 and put it towards maintenance, right? We can take 300,000 for salary increases or new employees, whatever. We can take 500 towards a new loan if we were to borrow 10 or 15 million. And we're still running, you know, $200,000 to $300,000, $400,000 leeway there as long as our student count is up. I think it's easily doable, and that's 500,000 a year in extra debt payment, which would be what, another $14 million.
Yeah, well, you could add, you know, roughly 11, you'd have 11.2 available from the construction loan towards your project, which from preliminarily what I'm hearing, I don't know if you need that.
I don't think we need that much. I think we need 7 million, but of course, Gary, you're wanting to do a little bit or spend a little bit more on the school. I think we can tell Todd what we want and what our budget is, and instead of putting in a window every 5 foot, he puts one in every 12 feet. You see what I mean? Just, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of stuff.
But the complaint that I got from the community when I got elected to the board was they're tired of us having the cheapest school around when we're the largest school around. Every school around us, with the exception of Corning and Highland, have a much larger millage than us, and we're the largest school district. Like people are, and I get it, and that's why I said I want to be transparent and put it in front of the public and say, you got options. We can either operate on this minimum budget you want to give us, and you can keep complaining about the cheap school, if that's what you want to call it, or you can raise the millage and we can have a school comparable to everybody else's. But it's not our decision to make, it's the public's.
Yeah.
And if the public will fund it, then we'll build it.
I think that, you know, we are wasting our time with the millage increase. I mean, it happened twice in a row. It got shut down exactly the same
Well,
percentage.
I think the public was ill-informed because when you're talking about the farmland being calculated differently, I want to know how to calculate that so I can tell the farmer, you're not being calculated the same. And when you're talking about $20 for every 100,000 that you value, it's not a lot of money, and most of the voters, if they'll come out and vote, don't vote a lot.
I think it was all in transparency and how it was sold to the community.
If I told a person we have a $300,000 house with your yard and whatever else you got, it's going to cost you $60 a year.
Well, the previous board, they put out there about that amount, and I remember going to those meetings, and they told us $20 to $30 a month.
But I don't think the
Or a year.
community understood the 25
And it got
and
shut
7.
down.
I think that was the biggest, the community not understanding that 25 mills was out of their hands. It didn't have anything to do with buildings, it didn't have anything to do with construction. That was gone. And the community looked at it and was like, oh, you're getting millions of dollars, you should be able to afford that. Well, they didn't understand.
In all honesty, Jennifer, that information was out there.
But I think it was, there were so many questions, like I had so many questions that were answered. One of them being like, how are you going to keep my kids safe? Are you putting, like my questions were, what's the access to the office? How many bathrooms are going to be in there? Are they going to be like, is there going to be enough space in the bathroom
We
for
had an
girls?
open house with Todd was there with all the drawings, 25 people showed up.
But I think you did it in the middle of COVID and people like.
But we had to do it.
I know, but I mean, I'm just saying like it needs to happen 6 to 9 months before the question's even there. Like
And you
here's the
had that
plan.
numerous times in
Well, and
numerous
I
applications.
think you learn lessons from
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And if we do, again, you know, we need to incorporate those, like get it out there more often, make more meetings, but because COVID was going on.
Yes,
That was a
yes.
issue.
So, Michael, if the board votes to do a millage increase, it gets shot down in November, what's our option from there? Just,
I can't give you a 100% guarantee because there's these new election laws coming up. What it would look like right now is that your next opportunity would be March of 26. Now, it does look like they're going to change when you can, all these requirements. Basically, I think you would have to be calling that election pretty much as soon as you lost your next.
well, we could lose the November and then we decide we want to restructure, right? Let's say we do it completely different to where we're not having to go to an election. Yes, it might cost us a few more dollars, right?
Well, you're saying just do a second lien?
Yes.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
said it would cost us a little bit more, but
Yeah, I mean, your annual payment, I'd have to look at how that financing structure would look. And I need to know what you wanted, you know, if it's like, the difference between 5 and 7 million is gonna be
Yeah.
substantial when it comes to that, because you're shortening your maturity length, your runway there. Because we're not able to go out 30 years. With the second lien bond, we're stuck to your current taxing authority. I'm not able to take out those 15 bonds, which means I'm gonna probably have to run interest only for the first 2 years to minimize the impact on your annual payment. So it wouldn't be just a quick fix, let's do a second lien. You could, I'm just saying, I don't think it would be as clean as, oh, it's gonna be an extra $300,000 or $400,000. I need to look and run
Yeah.
that for you so you can see it. But if you said, okay, November 25, we're gonna go with a, you know, restructuring of a 2 mil increase package, that fails, and we wanna just go no millage increase restructuring, then the quickest you could do that would be March. But from what I'm seeing, you'd be calling it, I mean, probably 1st of December of 25 to hit that deadline, which would be pretty tight to go from a November 18 loss to an election call within that, you know, that quick time. And I can't guarantee you that those, because they've got 2 election bills that have been passed, and they're gonna figure out how they merge those together.
So if you miss March, would it be November again before you?
If they don't change it, November's going away.
So if we miss the March deadline, when will be the next time?
March 27th.
Are you kidding me?
So you can only do it that one.
So you can't separate them out and make it clear. So if you go for it, you're punching yourself in the gut for possibly 2 years instead of a year.
The state has gone from allowing you in the last 4 years to call an election at any point, to quarterly, to twice a year, to what it looks like now to once a year. And I don't know why they don't think local boards can determine when they want to hold elections, but that's not my policy to discuss.
So in practice, though, the board could choose to forego, let's say the board made a decision on yes, moving forward with an election. The board could choose to forego the November date and just wait until March, correct?
Correct. If that is when they're going to be able to call those elections. We should
Right.
have some clarity in that, but it would be probably leaking up right around the time that we would either be calling or not calling a November election.
But in a way, you'd still be in the same boat. Because if it doesn't pass in March of 26, it's still March of 26.
Correct. No, what I was thinking was a longer, the one thing it would provide you is it provides a longer runway to educate the community.
That's what Columbia did. We started working with them in the summer and they did it both. Honestly, faster.
And I feel like I watched Paragould schools in the last couple of years try to promote that new, whatever their athletic complex or whatever they're calling it. And I feel like they did it very well. Like it was out to the community, there were pictures, it was like, this is what we're doing, this is not gonna cost you, but it's gonna cost us, we need your approval. And they did that for a long time. And the community had a good idea of what it was. I think with the last, we didn't really know what we were voting for. I mean, we saw it, but it was like, but we need this. And there was no explanation of why we need this. It was, but we need it. And if you don't do it, we're gonna lose the money. And it was like it felt like a scare tactic. And I don't think that the community was receptive to it.
Well, and even to go back to what Mr. Gary said, I understand it was COVID, but I was very in tune and trying to pay attention to stuff that was put down. I had no idea that meeting ever occurred.
Yeah.
So, you know, and this is my opinion when it comes to
They need
this.
to learn from those mistakes.
Right.
Or
I think-
whatever we think we're not doing, we do it right.
Right, we gotta find a way to go with the people, not bring them to us, go where they already are and then try to set something up.
And I think the school has to be appealing. You're gonna, I mean, you have to, I know that's y'all's specialty, but to me, like, I'm so fascinated with Wynn's new school right now because of the cafeteria and the things that they're doing in there. Like, it's just modern day.
Don't do Wynn.
So Wynn has this new partnership with somebody out of Northwest Arkansas where it's like dining chair, like it looks like a college diner in there. So like there's things that like need to appeal, like the safe room in the gym. Like, it needs to make sense.
I mean, even though it's gonna cost.
Well, another thing is too, and I'll ask you, Dr. Arbuckle, since you're superintendent, I mean, it's not more of a business than it's ever been with kids having school choice. Like, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Having a nice facility is what's gonna draw the kids and keep the kids that you do
Well,
have.
that's why I'm saying, if we build something, here's where I'm realistic, let's build something that looks good, that's like and designed, that's good, I mean, and it will last 60, 70 years.
I'm just saying, and this is not insulting. I think Sloan Hendricks School is beautiful. It's beautiful for Sloan Hendricks. But I don't think our communities will pass a millage in a school that looks like Sloan Hendricks. They're just not gonna do it. It's a metal building, they're not gonna do it.
And that's where I'm wondering, right? Do we need, if we're talking about making, even if we're talking about making a decision in, say, July and August, do you need the runway, that full runway of waiting until March to do that and get some drawings out there and say,
Here's some
You know.
options.
Because either way, the timeline's the same if you swing and miss.
So here's the thing about it, we're gonna have to have something, I mean.
I don't wanna swing it.
We're gonna have to.
I don't either, but I'm just saying.
Do something.
What is the school over there about Johnny Cash? Is that new school, you know, they got the big turf field right there on the interstate, is that Rivercrest? You pull up to that school, it's like, whoa. Like, that's what the community looks for. They look for whoa. And we have an eyesore of a
Our new
softball
role
field
in
in
that
front of it,
building.
but it's whoa.
And here's what, and I'm not trying to, it's the rub, what you're saying is absolutely right. But what you have to do is you have to smash that with what you can get past through the
And I understand that. I just
Because
don't wanna like,
you let Todd go. I mean, I've seen architects, he gets you up. But then I'm telling you, you need 10 mils to pay for the work. So I mean,
which is like, whoa.
yeah.
but I just don't,
That's just so hard.
But
We have
Todd
to roll him
specifically is
before.
pretty good at getting whoa for less.
but what I'm saying is I don't want prison block whoa, you know, like.
No,
this-
and I'm not, I'm just saying, that's why this is so hard.
Just because
Yeah.
we want to save some money, like, it still has to be whoa, but not,
And I think
Well,
that's,
you gotta do something community's proud of, that's
Right.
the first one. Plus, you got to do something that's gonna be there 60 years.
and it just has to make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a private community. I mean, it bothers me that the state average is 39 and we're at 32. Like, I think that's.
Well, you gotta remember, here's the thought I always have, you know, when someone comes to our community, whether it's a business or whatever, one of the first things they look at is the
The
school.
school.
And I know.
Yeah,
our
and look what Tate came in, they went to the BRTC, they didn't come to look at our school.
Yeah, I know there was, when ICO came in, you know.
Well, they weren't partnering with
The couple of management people wanted to come in and talk to the superintendent and talk to the principal.
Yeah.
They had kids in school, and they were totally impressed with, I think, our staff impressed them more than our school. But, you know, people look at those kind of things.
I
So
just
far
remember
as-
the gym last time, it was like promoted, well, we can house state, and we can house these tournaments, and we can do this, and we can do this. Whereas if we twist it and, well, it's a tornado shelter, and it's, you know, it's got classrooms in it, and it's got all these things, it's different, it's not just a
And
gym.
we're not the only school, and the Highlands in very much, they asked for was it 7 million last year?
Yeah.
You got figures.
And it got,
I think you got 100 votes against you too because of the rock building, tearing down the rock building.
Yeah.
but did we say we were tearing down the rock? I mean, we've never said we were.
And that, they were.
The what?
Oh, there.
The previous,
Yeah.
in
They
the
lost
previous
100 votes
millage,
on
yes.
that rock building.
Yeah.
I can't hear out of here.
As far
What
as,
he said, he said something.
in my personal opinion, as far as wherever we come back, each one of us is gonna have a different idea of what we can afford. But ultimately, I think it's gonna come back to what the superintendent tells us he's comfortable with. Because if he's not comfortable with it and leaves and goes to somewhere else, will we be able to get another superintendent that is? You know, so far as, you know, that's where we've got to trust him on what he feels like, you know, we can financially afford.
And he's,
You know,
Well-
as far as to give up.
Yes,
he's
and
gonna
I,
look down the road.
and I appreciate that, but I mean, and I'm gonna take a page from many other wise superintendents that I've heard. This is not my school, right? This is this community school, and it's this community's tax dollars, and, you know, it's this community's kiddos, right? I mean, I have a responsibility, you all have tasked me with that responsibility, but when push comes to shove, this shouldn't pass or fail because of Lance Arbuckle. This should pass or fail because this is the right thing to do for the kiddos in this community.
Well, I just want your
But I
numbers to
appreciate
be in check.
Right,
to where, like I say, even if, we don't want to do anything, in my opinion, outside of that scope that you're uncomfortable with.
And that's,
And
that's
you
because-
take another position, because then we don't know if we're gonna be able
Right.
to refill your position.
well, you will, I mean, but the point is, the point is.
Not if we're not here.
The point is that I think the way I hear that is, you all have tasked me, you trust my judgment. I think you know I'm not gonna put this district in a place that is a spot that they shouldn't be in or can't be in. Because eventually, you know, just like this board will change eventually, this seat will change eventually.
You're the only employee here.
That's right, but this seat will change eventually, but these kiddos in this school is gonna be here 60, 70, I mean, you guys have kind of talked about that.
I think
So,
we can get somewhere with it.
I mean, honestly, I think before we do any kind of building plans, I feel like we need to get community members together, like people in the community, maybe the mayor, or somebody that works for the city, or somebody that works in the courthouse, or somebody that works for Brad, you know, just whoever, and get like, okay, what are your ideas for high school? Because I feel like if we involve the community
Well,
and say,
involved in it.
what do you want to see in the school?
You gotta involve the right people.
so.
I mean, whoever.
So how about I do this? How about to kind of move this along? And I've thought the same thing. In fact, Craig and I have had this conversation. I see a role for what I'm going to call two different guiding coalitions, whatever you want to call it. One of them would be focused on the older voter. Right? Somebody who doesn't have kids in school,
Right.
somebody who doesn't, you know, who fits a particular demographic, who is going to vote, who is a taxpayer, but doesn't necessarily have kids in the school district. Right? Maybe they have grandkids or niece, nephews, that kind of thing. And then a second, you know, guiding coalition, if you will, that is more your parents who have kids in the community, who have kids in the school building, school district. Maybe they're not attending at Pocahontas, but they're voters in our community, because those are the kids we need to get back,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I can put that together over the next, you know, couple of weeks, within the next month, we can pull something together, or at least attempt to.
Well, and I agree, but there's something I just thought of. I really think the business people, you know, because they have, you know, a lot of stake. I think, you know, really they need to be explained, it's like Jennifer said, this is what it is, this is what we want, this is why. Our business community's always been the driving force.
You need to get your farmers in there though too. You need to get your poultry farmers and your I paid $11,000 last year to this school because of poultry farm.
Right,
That's a lot of money.
right.
And so when you've got a district full of people like that, $60 is not what we're worried about.
You're a vested investor.
When it's $9 a square foot, like it's,
So I think we can pull some of those folks together and start having that conversation.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
And then it would give the board more information to draw from.
right.
And that could be something that, once we get them set, maybe at the next board meeting, the board could make some determinations on, do you want to assign a member of the board to serve as a non-vocal member of that committee, right? Just so you can hear and then share back with your fellow board members on, this is what I heard, right?
Or you could do two, it wouldn't be a meeting if you put two without you, right? Or is two?
Under the current rules, it would be a
Two
meeting,
board members together at always.
Yeah,
but there is a bill that would change that. But I would feel comfortable if this body wanted to say, okay, we're gonna assign Chris to this one, and we're gonna assign Jennifer to this one, and then you're there as a presence, not as not as somebody who's moving the meeting along, but just hearing the voices so that you can share with other board members.
Information gathering.
Right, there you go, that's a good way to put it.
yeah. But I do think involving the community like that's gonna be
I agree.
the key, because it seemed like last time it was like, okay, well, this is what we're doing, with like no input.
Right. Okay. Anything else on that one?
No, thank y'all.
Do you want to take a quick break before we move into the?
Yeah.
Okay, we're back in session.
Pocahontas School Board is back in session. What's your next agenda item?
All right, so we're going to move to the action item. This is the counseling provider. I've been working with the counselors to, well, let me back up. As you know, right now, we have memorandums with several different, I think 3 or 4 different counseling providers in the district. In looking forward to next year, we feel like we have an opportunity to create a partnership with one single local provider. That would be ERISA. And so you have in your packet some information regarding that ERISA agreement. Would like for you to take a look at that. We do have our counselors here if you have any questions about that. Let me go back to this. One of the things I did, I had asked our counselors is to, that's the 21st, is to share some thoughts that they had regarding our, why this would be a good move to have one counseling provider. And so you have there in your packet several notes that these folks have provided to me about why having a single provider would be the best option for our kiddos. And so what we're trying to do is I'd like to go ahead and get that paperwork started to have those folks here and ready in August. We have already have a plan for how we would house those individuals on site. They would be with us every day. They have agreed that if this is something that the board is willing to allow the school district to enter into, they will have someone on site here every day. There will be they will be housed actually in this building, and if it performs the way we think it would, then there is some future options for expanding that and having additional counselors on site to help our kiddos. Now, what that means is they would be the licensed organization that we are partnering with, and if there were kiddos that were seeing other counselors, then it would kind of revert back to the way it was a couple of years ago, and those individuals would go off-site to see those counselors. Now, we feel like that's not going to be an imposition on those kiddos, because many of those other, or I say many, but several of those other entities are already taking kids off campus. They are not necessarily seeing them here. And so again, we feel like this would be a better option for our kiddos and for the partnership of the district. Obviously, if there's any questions, I'll be glad to ask the counselors to answer those. But they're here if you have anything that you'd like more information on.
Do you want me to just ask them?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Are they willing to take any pro bono? Like, if they're...
They actually have the contract for the county.
Okay.
And so whenever we have students now, even in the other services, if they're not available to do screening, emergency screening, they'll tell us, we'll just send them to ERISA for the emergency screening.
But will they do pro bono therapy on site if they need therapy? Like, is there a percentage of caseloads that they're willing to take pro bono, or do you know?
They do work with the sliding fee scale, and they have the grant for our district, grant for our county, so they
might put it under that.
Right, so they will do free counseling for families that qualify, or and they're gonna take care of any billing and student Medicaid and things like that. They'll still handle all of that, but the kids will be able to receive those services and screenings all here on site.
Do you know if they will, are they gonna make, this lady, you may know this. Are they gonna have this as a location, an office location, so they can see people with private insurance on site? Do we know that?
The only people that they'll see are
Medicaid.
students.
Right, but like, they're gonna bill their insurance, so private insurance can't be seen at school. It has to be billed office.
They will have an office.
So they're gonna bill off,
Yes,
okay,
yes,
okay.
they will have a spot that's here here in this building.
Okay.
That's only their
It's
office.
their space.
Okay, because that's what they would need, that like office to be able to bill other than Medicaid.
Yes, that's part of the agreement.
And I feel like through working with Ms. Miller and the team here, we've been able to secure a plan for that.
Well, just so I'm clear, a kid that's already receiving therapy from someone, they could no longer see them with this contract being signed?
No, they could see them, they just couldn't see them on campus. But the reality is,
They weren't being seen on campus?
they weren't really being seen on campus anyway.
Now, this doesn't, my main question is, it doesn't pose any risk to the district for not putting this out for bid to other agencies. Because there are other agencies in town. And I've seen them get kind of, because they didn't get to bid. So,
Well, they're not,
because Pocahontas has it's been asked for 15 years, can we do a contract? Can we do a contract? And it's always been turned down.
well, this is, in essence, this is an MOU. Right now, the district has MOUs with multiple providers, but
But this is new, like, I know.
Right.
Working in outpatient, it's been asked multiple times for the district, can we do this for you? And it's always been no. So my only concern is that these other agencies in town are gonna say, wait, why didn't we get to bid on it?
And I would, based on my perception of our experience this year, I would, if that's the case, then I would take this one off the table and we just kind of keep doing what we're doing, because
If you think it's not, if it's legally it's okay, then it's okay.
I don't know of any issue why it wouldn't be okay. Because at this point, no money is changing hands, right? It's, all we're doing is creating a partnership.
Let me ask y'all, what's the advantage to doing this? And what's the disadvantage? Or is there any disadvantage?
The only disadvantage is that there's going to be some adjustment for people, when they see kids that are from the other services, but that's something that we're going to work with them and work out. But the benefits are enormous. Whenever we have an incident where a student needs to have emergency screening, they're showing signs of self-harm or suicidal ideation, by law, we have to make sure that they're screened. Okay, so at this point, what happens is we have to call their parent. If they don't see an outside counselor, then we have to tell the parent, okay, you can either take them over to ERISA, and if they've got room, we'll screen them, which if they were here, we wouldn't have to do that. And I'll explain that process just very quickly in a second. But we have to tell them either take them to ERISA, or you have to take them to the emergency room and wait. And we've had families that have sat in the emergency room 4 or 5 hours, and they get tired of waiting and will leave. And so we have a kid in crisis that we sent out, knowing they're in crisis, and we don't have a safety plan in place for them. There's nothing that covers us. We're paying them over the parent. And even though legally they're not our responsibility, I know that I think I can speak on behalf of all of us. If something happened to that kid because they were waiting and the parent didn't stay there, we would need to be able to forgive ourselves.
Earlier intervention is what you're getting.
Yeah, it's that immediate access.
It's immediate.
Right.
If they're here, we have to call the parent to come anyhow, because right now we're just taking them to screen. If they came here, then we would take them down the hall to the room where our counseling services are for their office. They would be able to screen with them then. If the child is going to be receiving more services, they can do the intake right then. Right now, let's say that the child goes up to the emergency room or wherever, and they get screened, and they're like, okay, they don't need to be sent off, but they do need to start receiving services. We don't get that information. We don't know. It's up to the parent to make sure that they're following through. And we hope that they do, but we don't always know. The kids that come here, we don't have to worry about them getting an appointment across the river at one of the facilities or one of the places to do an intake. They'd be able to do it all here in one spot. So we'd be removing multiple barriers, including the fact that we have our on-site translator. We've got Mr. Lynn, who is our marshals translator and interpreter. And a lot of times, whenever the outside services, whenever they're trying to do screenings and things,
that, I think some of the bigger districts, I know my niece, she's a, whatever, she's a Springville school district, but she's employed by the district. You know, but I think they have three.
Most schools have an outside agency as a contract, like most schools, Pocahontas is one of the very few schools that has never done an outside contract.
Okay.
I mean, it's needed to happen, but most schools will have. And that was one of the things I said at the beginning, like they need an agency in it. Yeah.
And another benefit that we didn't necessarily hit on yet, that they're gonna not just have their full-time counselor, they're gonna have another person that works as well, that would be able to work with teachers to help them with behavior interventions, and like if a child's having a meltdown in the classroom, or they're struggling, they'll also be able to provide that support service that we don't necessarily have in place strong right now with our outside counseling services. So,
Now, do I also remember our conversation correctly that, and I think you alluded to this, that if a kiddo needs to be screened, ERISA is one of, if not the only organization we can call to do that work?
yes, absolutely. And even if the family decides they want to see one of the other services later, like if they request or can you call and one of the other services to do emergency screening, the other places do not do emergency screenings. They'll say take them to ERISA because they've got the contract that they can't pay. So that's why ERISA is the best fit for our families in our district, because everyone would be able to receive services when they would be told they have to go someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And most outpatient agencies, even for, unless it's a client of theirs, they're gonna tell you to go to the ER.
Yes.
And even 80% of the time, even if it is their client, they're gonna say go to the ER.
And we have found that is not a good solution here.
And the crisis usually happens at 2:30 on a Friday.
Yes.
And we're stuck with not, having
Yeah.
a resource. And then we worry about the kid all weekend,
Yeah.
wondering what really happened.
We're checking Loxie to see if anything that we've also, we need to go and check on.
They might start with one therapist here, but they might end up with about 3.
Or
Or 4.
I do know in speaking with their school-based person, Michael, he has said that he thinks a district our size, ultimately, they can end up with one counselor at every building.
I know when I was outpatient, there was 2 of us and a case manager just in the primary, and it was pre-K through 2nd grade. And they had 2 in every building. Like, it was a lot, and that was a big caseload, just for
Looks
one
like a good
building.
thing. Do you need approval, Stephen?
Yes, I would ask for a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement with ERISA for school year 26.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
We have a motion and second to approve ERISA as the mental health provider for the district. Everybody in favor say yes.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Okay, I'm going to scoot back to item 2.2. This is just a quick update. So what you're looking at, and we're not going to vote on this, I'm not going to ask for a vote on this evening because the state has still not passed the appropriation bill for schools. So we still don't know what the per pupil funding for next year and the following year will be. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But this is the, what you have in front of you in your packet is the certified salary schedule as approved by PPC. And so what you'll see is it's a 2-year phased in process. The first year would be a $500 fully certified stipend and an education stipend for master's, specialist, or doctorate using those numbers. $1,000 for master's, $1,500 for specialist, $2,000 for the doctorate. Year 2, 26-27, we would come back and now this would be planned, not proposed. So when we get to the vote on this, we're going to ask the board to vote for the year 1, the 25-26, or yeah, the 20, Oh, I got the wrong date. No,
Yeah.
I do. I got the right dates on there.
Okay.
25, 26, year one, we'll ask for a vote on. I'm putting forward that, to PPC, and that's how they voted on it, that the second year, 26, 27, is planned, where we would come back and we would add the loyalty stipend and the years of experience stipend. Now, obviously, the board could choose to do something different if that's what you wanted to do. But what we liked about this, and what I liked about it, what the value that PPC saw, was that the phased-in approach will provide 91% of all certified staff members will see an increase in year one of at least $500. This would increase the salaries in year one by $239,000, with an additional $158,000 in year two. Obviously, education, the reason we included that in year one was it was one of the top 2 items shared by faculty to address future stipends. You do have in your packet, we'll come back to it, the administrative stipends, and then salary expenditure would increase. Now, let's kind of talk about that. Right now, what the state has, they have amended their current proposal that in year one, so in next year, the current proposed amount is 8167. Okay, that's an increase. This year was 7771. So they'd see an increase on that one. In year two, however, they are going to cut that back to 8,037. Okay?
Never heard of that before.
So they're reducing it by $125 per student, but they're taking insurance out of the matrix. Okay? So insurance is scheduled to go up to, right now the district pays $234.50 for every employee who is on health insurance. Okay, that's our employee, and we are required to do that by the state. In addition, the state charges us a 7.6% fee on top of that they call premium assist, to assist with the premiums, obviously, right? And we have 169 staff members who currently are on our insurance. And so what that means to, I'm going to go back to the
$474,000 a year.
Where'd I go? Oh, shoot, I didn't bring mine. Oh, yeah, I did. Bring mine over. Here we go. There is, in essence, it is going to be it's going to be a positive to us that we do it. So even though the state is reducing the per pupil expenditure for year two by $125, given the number of people that we have on insurance, it's actually, we're going to see a positive about $237,000, right? Now, again, that's one of those things. Right now, that money we have not looked at historically the $234.50, nor the 7.6% premium assist. We have not considered that part of salaries and benefits. Okay? So in essence, there's $234,000 there that we're going to be ahead every year going forward. And what do you do with that $237,000? Well, I would advocate that we put that back into salaries. And so in year two, in that phase two, we're going to see a little bit of a cushion there, but we're still probably looking at about 84% of foundation funding, but I'm okay with that given the discussion that we're having in the past and that we're having tonight about what are we going to do on salaries, right? In order to deal with the salary piece, we're going to have to kind of think about it a little differently, right? So all that to say, I don't necessarily think, we will actually see a benefit when they reduce back to 8,037 and remove the $334 that we would be putting into insurance, taking that out of the matrix and taking that over for the district. And they're gonna take it over for all districts, right? Long story short, we'll actually,
Are you saying the state is gonna pay that then? For the employees?
right, they're gonna take that money out of the matrix, send us less, but they're gonna take care of sending the insurance payment directly to EBD now, which we won't have to do.
Good, that's good.
I am not, it's an informational item tonight because they haven't passed it down a little rough.
I think it's very wise to do it the way we did it, and I totally agree. Just phase this in, so you'll have something you can look at next year, the real numbers. But we got something to start with.
Right.
Right?
Now, in addition, they are also going to start reducing teacher equalization money. The district has gotten $185 per student in teacher equalization money for a long time. That's a little over $360,000. So they're going to start backing off of that money. And what I'm hearing is that they're going to start migrating that money into the LEARNS Act money. We will still be getting that $900,000 plus of LEARNS money. But over the next 3 years, they're going to start phasing out the teacher equalization money. So we are yet to see if we will be a positive on that, a negative on that, or somewhere in the middle. My best hope is that it's neutral to us, but it could cost us some money.
So we've talked, this is just a little bit off the top, well, kind of, but not really. We talk about this as the beginning of this, so we're talking about continuing to increase salaries till we get them where we think the teachers should be. Are we just gonna go back and revisit this game plan, so to speak, and just increase the dollar amount at each?
I think every year you're looking at, every
So we're
year.
not gonna implement phase 2 without looking at it again.
Correct.
We're just approving phase 1.
You would just be approving phase 1. I cannot believe I lost that. Oh, no, I didn't.
And PPC's okay with just focusing on education level the first year?
Yes. They liked it because 90% plus of everybody in the district gets a bump. So.
And you say we're not voting on this?
Not voting on this tonight. The actual percentage for school year 27, so when this goes into effect in 2 years, would be, right now would be about 84.75% foundation funding. But again, we're gonna have to kind of start thinking about it in different terms if we're gonna have the conversation of what are we doing with this debt surplus, right? So just kind of keep that in mind as we go along.
When is our regular meeting scheduled?
The 21st.
21st.
All right. Anything else that you all have on that? All right. Then I would recommend that the board go into executive session for employment purposes.
I do have a question about the administration schedule that's on here, though.
Okay.
Why is it that the secondary assistant principal rate is higher than the elementary assistant, in the index range?
Because there is more responsibility and more things that we're asking the secondary assistant principals to do. Now, that range provides me some flexibility as the superintendent to consider other things. That's why I
was just asking because the principals were equal and then the assistant principal was different. I was like, well, that seems odd that you wouldn't make them equal as well.
It has to do with, what we ask of our principals is pretty, it's more leveled across than what we ask of our assistant principals. And so that's just where that's coming from.
Okay.
But it also provides me the flexibility to be able to make some of those decisions within that structure.
So the board's now going to go into executive session for employment purposes.
Okay, we're back.
All right, we're back in regular session of Pocahontas School District. Do you have some recommendations?
Okay, yep, we have some employment recommendations. So administration is asking for approval to transfer Destiny D. Clerk into the East Facilitator position. You have resignations in your packet from Amanda Sutton, Mallory Bennett, Whitney Crutcher, Naomi Boyer, and Shauna Guest. And then in addition, you have the list of teacher candidates who would be available for a contract for school year 26, as well as the classified list for the same school year. So we would recommend approval of the transfer, the resignations, and the contract lists.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and second to approve all these employment requests and transfers. Everybody in favor say yes.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
And Brent. And then you have in your packet as a point of information, the student transfer on the list. We did approve that. So if there are any questions about it, I'd be glad to entertain those. But if not, then we would just need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.